The emergence of the Mitanni Empire from the political fragmentation of northern Mesopotamia represents one of the most significant transformations in Near Eastern history during the middle 2nd millennium BC. Archaeological excavations at sites such as Tel Brak, Tel Leilan and Tel Mozan reveal a complex picture of political dissolution and reconsolidation that preceded Mitanni's rise to prominence. The collapse of the old Assyrian trade networks around 1750 BC had left a power vacuum across the upper Mesopotamian plains, creating conditions ripe for new political formations to emerge from the remnants of earlier Hurrian city-states and principalities. Cuneiform tablets from Nutsi dating to the 15th century BC provide crucial insights into the social and political structures that characterized this transitional period. These documents reveal a landscape dotted with small Hurrian kingdoms, each controlling limited territories around fortified urban centres. The rulers of these polities bore distinctly Hurrian names such as Tishatal, Irisharima and Shaushtatar, indicating the persistence of indigenous leadership structures, even as external pressures mounted. However, the fragmented nature of political authority made these kingdoms vulnerable to both internal strife and external conquest, setting the stage for the dramatic changes that would follow. The arrival of Indo-Aryan warrior groups in northern Mesopotamia during the 17th and 16th centuries BC marked a pivotal moment in the region's political evolution. These newcomers, likely originating from the Iranian Plateau or Central Asian steppes, brought with them advanced military technologies and organisational methods that would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the region. Archaeological evidence from Tel al-Rimah and other sites reveals the sudden appearance of horse burials, bronze horse bits, and chariot components that correspond chronologically with the earliest references to Indo-Aryan personal names in cuneiform sources. The integration of these Indo-Aryan elites with the existing Hurrian population created a unique hybrid culture that combined indigenous administrative traditions with innovative military practices. Tablets from Kirkuk preserve lists of personal names that demonstrate this cultural fusion, with Indo-Aryan names such as Artatama, Shutarna, and Tushrata appearing alongside traditional Hurrian appellations. More significantly, these documents reveal the adoption of Sanskrit-derived terminology for horse training and chariot warfare, including terms like Aika Vartana and Tri Vartana, that indicate sophisticated equestrian knowledge. The technological revolution brought by horse-drawn chariots cannot be overstated in its impact on military affairs. Each war chariot required careful construction, using seasoned wood, bronze fittings, and leather components, representing a significant investment in both materials and skilled craftsmanship. The vehicles themselves measured approximately 2 meters in length and featured lightweight spoked wheels that allowed for greater speed and maneuverability than earlier solid-wheeled carts. Training programs for both horses and charioteers demanded years of preparation, creating a professional warrior class that possessed skills unavailable to traditional infantry forces. Archaeological excavations at Alalakh have uncovered extensive stabling facilities and training grounds that illustrate the scale of this military transformation. The remains include stone-lined drainage channels, feeding troughs carved from basalt blocks, and exercise yards with carefully maintained surfaces suitable for chariot maneuvers. Skeletal analysis of horse remains from these contexts reveals animals standing 14 to 15 hands high, bred specifically for speed and endurance, rather than the heaviest draft work typical of earlier periods. The geographic consolidation of Mitanni power centered on the fertile valleys of the Khabur river system, where abundant water resources and rich alluvial soils provided the agricultural foundation necessary to support a centralized state. The Khabur Triangle, bounded by the Euphrates to the west and the Tigris to the east, offered natural defensive advantages while facilitating control over crucial trade routes connecting Anatolia, Syria, and southern Mesopotamia. Satellite imagery and ground surveys have identified numerous tell sites throughout this region that show evidence of fortification and urban planning consistent with Mitanni administrative control. The establishment of Washakani as the royal capital represented a deliberate choice to create a new centre of power rather than adopting an existing urban centre with established traditions and competing loyalties. Archaeological investigation of potential sites for Washakani, including Tel Fakharia and Tel Brak, suggests a substantial urban complex featuring royal palaces, administrative buildings, and residential quarters arranged according to carefully planned layouts. The capital's location in the heart of the Kabur Valley provided strategic access to agricultural resources while maintaining defensible positions against potential enemies. Urban planning at Washukani incorporated both Hurrian architectural traditions and innovations introduced by the Indo-Aryan elite. Excavations reveal the use of mud brick construction techniques refined over centuries of Mesopotamian practice, combined with new defensive designs that emphasized mobility and rapid response to threats. The royal palace complex featured extensive courtyards suitable for chariot assemblies and horse training, while administrative quarters included specialized facilities for record-keeping and diplomatic correspondence. The early diplomatic landscape surrounding Mitanni's emergence involved complex negotiations with established regional powers who viewed the new kingdom with mixture of suspicion and opportunity. Assyrian sources from the reign of Adad-nirari first describe border conflicts with Mitanni forces as early as 1550 BC, indicating that the new kingdom had achieved sufficient strength to challenge Assyrian territorial claims in the upper Tigris region. These encounters typically involved raids and counter-raids, rather than large-scale battles, as both sides tested the military capabilities and territorial ambitions of their opponents. Babylonian diplomatic correspondence from the same period reveals a more cautious approach to relations with Mitanni, reflecting Babylon's focus on southern Mesopotamian affairs and reluctance to become entangled in northern conflicts. However, trade relationships continued between Babylonian merchants and Mitanni territories, particularly in luxury goods such as lapis lazuli, silver, and textiles that required long-distance commercial networks to reach their markets. The most significant challenge to early Mitanni expansion came from Egyptian military campaigns into the Levant under pharaohs Thutmose I and Thutmose III. Egyptian military records describe encounters with chariot forces bearing distinctly Indo-Aryan names, indicating that Mitanni influence had extended westward into Syria by the early 15th century BC. The Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BC represents the first major recorded clash between Egyptian and Mitanni allied forces, though the Mitanni kingdom itself remained beyond the reach of Egyptian military expeditions. These early conflicts established patterns of warfare that would characterize Mitanni military doctrine throughout the kingdom's existence. Mitanni forces emphasized mobility and rapid strikes rather than prolonged sieges or territorial occupation, utilizing their superior chariot technology to achieve tactical advantages before withdrawing to defensible positions. This approach proved particularly effective against enemies who relied primarily on infantry formations and traditional siege warfare techniques. The development of Mitanni military organization reflected the hybrid nature of the kingdom's political structure, combining Indo-Aryan leadership with Hurrian administrative traditions and local military customs. Chariot squadrons formed the elite core of Mitanni armies, with each unit comprising multiple vehicles supported by infantry contingents drawn from local populations. Training regimens emphasized coordination between different military branches, requiring extensive practice to achieve the timing and communication necessary for effective battlefield performance. The military innovations that had enabled Mitanni's initial consolidation soon became the foundation for systematic territorial expansion across northern Mesopotamia and the Syrian plains. Under King Paratana, whose reign marked the beginning of documented Mitanni imperial ambitions around 1500 BC, the kingdom launched coordinated campaigns designed to secure control over the vital trade arteries connecting the Anatolian highlands with the commercial centres of Babylon and Assyria. Archaeological evidence from Tel Bila and Tel al-Rimah indicates widespread destruction layers dating to this period, followed by reconstruction phases featuring distinctly Mitanni architectural elements and administrative installations. The strategic importance of these trade routes cannot be understated in understanding Mitanni's expansion priorities. Caravans carrying tin from Anatolia, copper from the Taurus Mountains, and silver from the Zagros Ranges required secure passage through territories that had previously been contested between numerous small kingdoms. Mitanni forces systematically occupied key river crossings along the Euphrates and Tigris systems, establishing fortified posts that could monitor commercial traffic while extracting taxation revenues. Excavations at sites such as Tel Sheikh Hamad have revealed customs installations featuring standardized weights, measuring devices and storage facilities designed to process and tax merchandise passing through Mitanni territory. The kingdom's military campaigns followed carefully planned sequences that reflected sophisticated understanding of regional geography and seasonal patterns. Spring offensives typically targeted agricultural regions during planting seasons, when enemy populations were most vulnerable to disruption and least able to mount effective resistance. Mitanni chariot squadrons would sweep across cultivated plains, destroying crops and irrigation infrastructure while avoiding heavily fortified urban centres that could withstand prolonged sieges. This approach maximised economic damage while minimising Mitanni casualties, forcing enemy rulers to negotiate tributary arrangements rather than risk complete agricultural collapse. King Shaushtatar, who succeeded Paratarna around 1480 BC, elevated these tactical innovations into a comprehensive imperial strategy. Cuneiform tablets from Nutsi describe his campaigns against the Assyrian heartland, where Mitanni forces penetrated as far south as the suburbs of Ashur itself. The psychological impact of these raids proved as significant as their material effects, demonstrating to Assyrian elites that their traditional defensive strategies could no longer guarantee security against Mitanni mobile warfare techniques. Assyrian chronicles from this period describe desperate attempts to recruit additional chariot units and hire foreign mercenaries, indicating the profound military pressure exerted by Mitanni expansion. The integration of conquered territories into the Mitanni administrative system revealed the kingdom's sophisticated approach to imperial governance. Rather than imposing uniform control over diverse populations, Mitanni administrators developed flexible arrangements that preserved local customs while ensuring political loyalty and economic tribute. Hurrian scribes, trained in both cuneiform writing and local languages, served as intermediaries between Mitanni governors and subject communities. These officials maintained detailed records of population levels, agricultural production, and military obligations that enabled central authorities to optimize resource extraction without triggering widespread rebellions. Archaeological investigations at Alalak have uncovered extensive archives documenting these administrative procedures in remarkable detail. Tablets describe the appointment of local rulers as Mitanni vassals, complete with formal investiture ceremonies that combine traditional Hurrian rituals with Indo-Aryan oath-taking procedures. Vassal kings received bronze swords, gold jewellery and ceremonial chariots as symbols of their subordinate status, while providing hostages, annual tribute payments, and military contingents to demonstrate their continued loyalty to Washukani. The distinctive political structure that emerged from this expansion process represented a unique fusion of Hurrian administrative traditions with Indo-Aryan military aristocracy. The Mitanni royal court developed elaborate hierarchies that distinguished between different categories of nobles based on their ethnic origins, military functions, and territorial responsibilities. Indo-Aryan chariot warriors occupied the highest military ranks, bearing titles such as Marianu that derive from Sanskrit terminology for warrior castes. These elites received land grants in conquered territories, creating a feudal-like system that tied military service to agricultural revenues. Hurrian administrators, meanwhile, maintained control over civilian governance, taxation, and diplomatic correspondence. Their expertise in cuneiform literacy, legal procedures, and regional languages made them indispensable for managing the complex relationships between the royal court and diverse subject populations. Tablets from Kirkuk preserve examples of bilingual documents that illustrate this administrative cooperation, with Hurrian legal formulations translated into Akkadian for international diplomatic purposes while preserving traditional terminology for local usage. The economic foundations supporting Mitanni's imperial expansion extended far beyond simple agricultural taxation to encompass sophisticated exploitation of mineral resources and commercial networks. The kingdom's control over copper mining operations in the Taurus Mountains provided access to raw materials essential for bronze production, while Mitanni workshops developed advanced metallurgical techniques that produced superior weapons and tools. Archaeological analysis of bronze artifacts from Mitanni sites reveals alloy compositions that demonstrate precise control over tin and copper ratios, producing materials with enhanced hardness and durability compared to contemporary products from other regions. The fertile agricultural lands of the Kabul Triangle generated substantial surpluses that supported both military campaigns and urban populations. Irrigation systems expanded during this period, show evidence of coordinated planning that maximized water distribution across multiple river valleys. Canal networks extended over distances of several kilometers, featuring sophisticated engineering solutions including aqueducts, distribution gates, and drainage channels that prevented salinization of cultivated soils. Satellite imagery has identified remnants of these irrigation works, revealing geometric field patterns that indicate centralized agricultural planning on an unprecedented scale. Commercial taxation provided another crucial revenue stream that enabled Mitanni's continued military expansion. The kingdom's strategic position astride major trade routes allowed administrators to extract customs duties from merchants travelling between Anatolia, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Archaeological evidence from border posts indicates the development of standardized procedures for assessing and collecting these taxes, including the use of official seals, certified weights, and written receipts that facilitated long-distance commerce while generating government revenues. The most significant diplomatic challenge facing Mitanni during this expansion period came from Egyptian military campaigns into the Levant under Thutmose I and his successors. Egyptian military records describe the pharaoh's advance as far north as the Euphrates River around 1495 BC, where Egyptian forces encountered Mitanni chariot squadrons for the first time. These initial contacts established patterns of conflict that would dominate Near Eastern international relations for the next century, as both empires sought to control the wealthy Syrian city-states that provided access to Mediterranean trade networks. Thutmose's first campaign represents the first documented clash between Egyptian and Mitanni military doctrines, revealing fundamental differences in their approaches to warfare and territorial control. Egyptian forces relied heavily on disciplined infantry formations, supported by relatively small numbers of chariots, emphasizing siege warfare and the systematic occupation of fortified positions. Mitanni armies, by contrast, prioritized mobility and rapid strikes that avoided prolonged engagements while maximizing disruption to enemy supply lines and communications. The Battle of Carchemish, fought around 1490 BC, illustrated these tactical differences in dramatic fashion. Egyptian chronicles describe Mitanni chariot squadrons appearing suddenly from multiple directions, launching coordinated attacks against Egyptian supply columns before withdrawing to prepare positions in the surrounding hills. Egyptian infantry formations, trained for frontal assaults against static defences, proved poorly adapted to counter these mobile tactics. The engagement ended inconclusively, with Egyptian forces maintaining control of the immediate battlefield, while Mitanni units retained freedom of movement throughout the broader region. Under Thutmose III, Egyptian military strategy evolved to address the Mitanni threat more effectively. The Pharaohs' campaigns between 1479 and 1457 BC featured larger chariot contingents, improved logistics systems, and coordinated naval operations that reduced Egyptian dependence on vulnerable overland supply routes. The famous Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BC, while primarily involving Syrian allies rather than Mitanni forces directly, demonstrated Egyptian adaptation to mobile warfare techniques pioneered by their northern rivals. Mitanni responses to Egyptian pressure reveal the kingdom's sophisticated understanding of international diplomacy and alliance systems. Rather than confronting Egyptian armies directly, Mitanni rulers cultivated relationships with Syrian city-states that could serve as buffer zones against Egyptian expansion. Treaties preserved in the archives of Mari and Ugarit describe complex arrangements whereby Mitanni provided military support and commercial privileges to local rulers in exchange for strategic cooperation against Egyptian advances. These diplomatic initiatives extended beyond mere military alliances to encompass cultural and economic exchanges that strengthened Mitanni influence throughout the region. Mitanni craftsmen introduced advanced bronze working techniques to Syrian workshops, while Mitanni merchants established trading posts in major commercial centres. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Tel Achana reveals the presence of Mitanni-style pottery, jewellery and weapons that indicate sustained cultural interaction rather than temporary military occupation. The development of Mitanni's imperial administration during this period required innovations in communication systems that could coordinate activities across vast distances. Royal messengers travelled established routes between Washukani and provincial centres, carrying sealed tablets that contained detailed instructions for local governors. Archaeological discoveries of way stations and supply depots along these routes indicate the systematic nature of Mitanni communications networks, with facilities positioned at regular intervals to provide fresh horses and provisions for official travellers. Intelligence gathering represented another crucial aspect of Mitanni imperial administration, as the kingdom's survival depended on accurate information about enemy movements and intentions. Mitanni agents operated throughout Syria and Mesopotamia, often disguised as merchants or craftsmen while collecting information about military preparations, political developments, and economic conditions. Diplomatic correspondence from this period occasionally references these intelligence activities, though the secretive nature of such operations limits detailed documentation. The technological innovations that supported Mitanni military supremacy continued evolving throughout this expansion period, with particular attention to chariot design and horse breeding programs. Archaeological remains of Mitanni chariots from sites such as Tel Brak show refinements in wheel construction, axle design, and body configuration that improved performance while reducing weight. These vehicles featured bronze reinforcements at stress points, leather suspension systems that absorbed shock during high-speed maneuvers, and specialised harness arrangements that maximised horse efficiency. Horse breeding operations expanded significantly to meet the demands of Mitanni's growing chariot forces, with royal stud farms established in regions with optimal grazing conditions and water access. Skeletal analysis of horse remains from Mitanni sites indicates selective breeding programs that emphasize speed, endurance, and temperament suitable for military applications. These animals typically stood between 14 and 15 hands high, with bone structure optimized for sustained running rather than heavy draft work. The systematic expansion of Mitanni influence westward into Syria inevitably brought the kingdom into direct confrontation with Egyptian imperial ambitions under Thutmose III, whose military campaigns fundamentally altered the balance of power across the ancient Near East. The pharaoh's methodical approach to Levantine conquest differed markedly from earlier Egyptian expeditions, incorporating lessons learned from previous encounters with Mitanni mobile warfare tactics. His forces now included substantially enlarged chariot contingents, numbering over 1,000 vehicles according to inscriptions at Karnak, along with specialised siege equipment and coordinated naval support that reduced dependence on vulnerable overland supply lines. The Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BC represented the culmination of these Egyptian military reforms, though the engagement primarily involved Syrian city-states, allied with Mitanni rather than direct confrontation with the kingdom's main forces. Egyptian military records describe a coalition of over 300 Syrian and Palestinian rulers assembled under the leadership of the King of Kadesh, supported by Mitanni chariot squadrons and military advisors. The coalition's strategic position at Megiddo controlled the crucial Aruna Pass, which provided the most direct route between Egypt and northern Syria through the Carmel Ridge. Thutmose III's tactical decision to advance through the narrow Aruna Pass, despite warnings from his generals about the vulnerability of his forces in the confined terrain, demonstrated the pharaoh's confidence in Egyptian military capabilities. The Egyptian army stretched over several kilometres as it navigated the mountain defile, with advanced scouts reporting enemy positions on the plains beyond. Archaeological surveys of the battlefield area have identified ancient road surfaces and defensive positions that correspond to Egyptian accounts of the engagement, including stone walls and earthworks that show evidence of hasty construction by the defending coalition. The battle itself unfolded across the fertile Jezreel Valley, where Egyptian forces deployed in traditional formation with infantry phalanxes anchored by chariot squadrons on both flanks. Coalition forces adopted a more dispersed arrangement that reflected Mitanni tactical influence, with chariot units positioned for rapid manoeuvres, while infantry contingents occupied fortified positions around the city walls. The engagement began at dawn with Egyptian chariot charges against coalition positions, followed by coordinated infantry assaults that gradually compressed the defending forces against Megiddo's fortifications. Egyptian victory at Megiddo resulted from superior coordination between different military units rather than technological advantages, as both sides possessed comparable equipment and training. Thutmose III's forces maintained disciplined formations throughout the battle, preventing coalition chariots from exploiting gaps in Egyptian lines that had proven decisive in earlier encounters. The pharaoh's personal leadership during critical moments, including his prominent position in the front ranks of the chariot charge, provided psychological advantages that compensated for the coalition's superior knowledge of local terrain. The siege of Megiddo that followed the battlefield victory revealed Egyptian adaptations to Mitanni-influenced defensive strategies. Coalition forces had prepared extensive fortifications that incorporated lessons from previous Egyptian campaigns, including multiple defensive lines, underground tunnels for supply and communication, and specialised positions for chariot counterattacks. Egyptian siege techniques had evolved correspondingly, featuring coordinated assaults from multiple directions, systematic destruction of water sources, and the construction of circumvallation walls that prevented coalition reinforcements from reaching their defenders. Archaeological excavations at Tel El Mutselim, the ancient site of Megiddo, have uncovered destruction layers that correspond chronologically to Thutmose III's campaign. These deposits contain Egyptian-style arrowheads, bronze weapons, and pottery fragments that confirm the historical accounts of the siege. More significantly, the excavations reveal evidence of systematic urban planning in the reconstruction phase, with Egyptian administrative buildings and storage facilities that indicate direct imperial control rather than tributary arrangements. The strategic consequences of Egyptian victory extended far beyond the immediate military results, fundamentally altering the political landscape across Syria and Palestine. Syrian city-states that had previously maintained independence through Mitanni protection now faced direct Egyptian administration, with pharaonic governors replacing local rulers and Egyptian garrisons occupying major urban centres. This transformation disrupted traditional trade relationships and forced Mitanni diplomats to develop new strategies for maintaining influence in regions beyond direct military reach. Mitanni responses to Egyptian expansion demonstrated the kingdom's sophisticated understanding of asymmetric warfare and alliance politics. Rather than attempting to match Egyptian military strength through direct confrontation, Mitanni rulers focused on supporting anti-Egyptian coalitions that could maintain pressure on pharaonic forces while conserving their own military resources. This approach required careful coordination with local leaders who possessed intimate knowledge of regional terrain and population dynamics, but lacked the military technology necessary to challenge Egyptian armies independently. The strategic importance of Damascus became increasingly apparent as both empires recognized its crucial position controlling trade routes between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean coast. The city's location at the intersection of major caravan paths made it essential for maintaining commercial relationships with Phoenician ports, while its agricultural hinterland provided resources necessary for supporting large military forces. Mitanni efforts to secure Damascene allegiance involved complex negotiations that balanced local autonomy against imperial obligations, offering protection from Egyptian raids in exchange for tribute payments and military cooperation. Archaeological evidence from Damascus indicates significant Mitanni cultural influence during this period, including the adoption of Hurrian religious practices and Indo-Aryan personal names among the local elite. Cylinder seals bearing Mitanni royal symbols have been discovered in contexts that suggest their use by local administrators, while bronze weapons show metallurgical techniques consistent with Mitanni workshops. These cultural markers indicate sustained political relationships rather than temporary military occupation, reflecting Mitanni preferences for indirect control over distant territories. Egyptian countermeasures to Mitanni influence in Damascus involved both military pressure and diplomatic initiatives designed to undermine the kingdom's alliance network. Thutmose III's subsequent campaigns between 1456 and 1450 BC systematically targeted Syrian cities that maintained pro-Mitanni policies, combining military conquest with generous terms for rulers willing to abandon their northern allegiances. Egyptian records describe the transportation of Syrian princes to Egypt for education and cultural assimilation, creating a generation of local leaders with personal ties to the pharaonic court. The evolution of chariot warfare during this period reflected continuous technological competition between Egyptian and Mitanni military engineers. Mitanni innovations focused on reducing vehicle weight while maintaining structural integrity, enabling faster acceleration and improved maneuverability during battlefield engagements. Archaeological remains of Mitanni chariots from sites such as Tel Brak show refinements in wheel design that reduced rolling resistance, along with improved suspension systems that absorbed shock during high-speed turns and sudden stops. Egyptian chariot development emphasized durability and crew protection rather than pure speed, reflecting the kingdom's preference for sustained engagements over rapid strikes. Egyptian vehicles featured reinforced platforms that could accommodate additional equipment, including composite bows, spare arrows, and communication devices necessary for coordinating large-scale military operations. The adoption of bronze armour for chariot crews provided protection against enemy projectiles, while maintaining sufficient mobility for effective combat performance. Training programs for chariot warfare expanded significantly in both kingdoms as military leaders recognized the decisive importance of superior crew performance. Mitanni training emphasized individual initiative and rapid decision-making, with crews practicing complex maneuvers that required split-second coordination between driver and archer. These exercises took place on specially constructed courses that simulated battlefield conditions, including obstacles, target ranges, and communication challenges that tested crew abilities under stress. Egyptian chariot training focused on unit cohesion and disciplined execution of predetermined tactical plans, reflecting the kingdom's emphasis on coordinated military operations. Egyptian crews practiced formation movements that maintained precise spacing and timing, enabling large chariot squadrons to execute complex maneuvers without confusion or collision. These training programs produced highly disciplined forces that could maintain effectiveness during prolonged engagements, though they sometimes lacked the flexibility necessary for responding to unexpected tactical developments. The development of siege warfare techniques represented another area of intense competition between the rival empires. Mitanni engineers developed innovative approaches to urban defense that maximized the advantages of interior positions while minimizing vulnerability to Egyptian siege equipment. These innovations included the construction of multiple defensive lines that forced attackers to overcome successive obstacles, underground tunnel systems that enabled surprise counterattacks, and specialized positions for chariot operations within urban environments. Egyptian siege capabilities evolved to address these defensive innovations through systematic approaches that combined military pressure with economic warfare. Egyptian forces developed techniques for disrupting water supplies, destroying agricultural resources, and isolating defended cities from external support. The construction of siege camps with permanent fortifications enabled Egyptian armies to maintain pressure over extended periods, gradually wearing down defender morale while preventing relief expeditions from reaching besieged cities. The strategic implications of these military developments extended beyond immediate battlefield results to influence broader patterns of international relations across the ancient Near East. Smaller kingdoms found themselves forced to choose between Egyptian and Mitanni patronage, with their decisions determining access to trade networks, military protection, and cultural exchange opportunities. These choices often reflected geographic considerations, with kingdoms closer to Egyptian bases in Palestine gravitating toward pharaonic alliance, while those in northern Syria maintained traditional relationships with Mitanni. Alliance-building strategies developed by both empires involved sophisticated combinations of military support, economic incentives, and cultural exchange programs designed to create lasting political relationships. Mitanni diplomats offered access to advanced military technologies, including chariot construction techniques and horse training programs, while providing protection from Assyrian expansion pressures that threatened many Syrian kingdoms. These arrangements typically involved formal treaty relationships that specified mutual obligations while preserving local autonomy and internal affairs. Egyptian alliance strategies emphasized the benefits of incorporation into a stable imperial system that provided security, economic opportunities, and cultural advancement. Egyptian administrators offered Syrian rulers positions within the imperial hierarchy, along with access to Egyptian markets and educational institutions that could benefit local populations. These inducements proved particularly effective with kingdoms that had suffered from chronic instability or external threats that exceeded their independent military capabilities. The gradual shift in regional power balance became apparent through changing patterns of tribute payments, military cooperation, and diplomatic correspondence that reflected evolving political relationships. Egyptian administrative documents from this period record increasing tribute revenues from Syrian territories, along with growing numbers of Syrian contingents serving in pharaonic military campaigns. These developments indicate successful Egyptian integration of conquered territories into imperial administrative systems. Mitanni influence, meanwhile, became increasingly concentrated in northern Syria and upper Mesopotamia, where the kingdom maintained direct control over core territories while exercising indirect influence through alliance relationships with local rulers. This geographic consolidation reflected practical limitations on Mitanni military capabilities rather than strategic preferences, as the kingdom lacked the administrative infrastructure necessary for governing distant territories under direct Egyptian military pressure. The competition for control over key commercial centres intensified as both empires recognized the economic importance of maintaining access to international trade networks. Cities such as Aleppo, Carchemish, and Ugarit occupied crucial positions along trade routes connecting Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean coast, making their political allegiances essential for imperial economic prosperity. Both Egyptian and Mitanni diplomats invested substantial resources in cultivating relationships with merchants and local officials who controlled these commercial networks. The ascension of King Shutana, second to the Mitanni throne around 1400 BC, coincided with a fundamental transformation in Near Eastern geopolitics that would reshape the kingdom's foreign policy for generations. Archaeological evidence from Boghazköy reveals the systematic expansion of Hittite military installations across central Anatolia during this period, with fortified positions extending southward toward the traditional boundaries of Mitanni influence in northern Syria. Hittite cuneiform tablets describe coordinated campaigns under King Tudhaliya, first that targeted Mitanni vassal states along the upper Euphrates, employing siege warfare techniques that proved devastatingly effective against traditional Hurrian defensive strategies. The Hittite military machine that emerged during this period represented a qualitative leap in Anatolian military capabilities, incorporating lessons learned from decades of conflict with various regional powers. Hittite armies featured heavily armoured infantry formations equipped with iron weapons that provided significant advantages over bronze-armed opponents, while their siege trains included sophisticated equipment capable of breaching the strongest fortifications. Archaeological excavations at Hittite military sites reveal standardized weapon production facilities, extensive training grounds, and logistical infrastructure that supported sustained military campaigns across vast distances. Shutana II's strategic assessment of this emerging threat demonstrated remarkable foresight regarding the changing balance of power in the ancient Near East. Mitanni intelligence networks, operating throughout Anatolia and northern Syria, provided detailed reports of Hittite military preparations that included troop concentrations, supply depot construction, and diplomatic overtures to anti-Mitanni factions within Syrian city-states. These intelligence reports, preserved in fragmentary form in later Assyrian archives, describe Hittite forces numbering in the tens of thousands, supported by siege equipment and logistical systems that enabled operations far from Anatolian bases. The recognition that traditional Mitanni military doctrine could not effectively counter this new Hittite threat prompted a comprehensive re-evaluation of the kingdom's strategic priorities. Mitanni chariot forces, while still formidable against Egyptian and Assyrian opponents, proved vulnerable to Hittite combined arms tactics that integrated heavy infantry, archery units, and siege equipment into coordinated battlefield formations. The psychological impact of early Hittite victories against Mitanni allies created additional challenges as Syrian vassal states began questioning the kingdom's ability to provide effective protection against this northern menace. The diplomatic revolution that followed represented one of the most dramatic policy reversals in ancient Near Eastern history, as Shutana II initiated secret negotiations with Egyptian representatives despite decades of military confrontation between the two empires. These preliminary discussions, conducted through intermediaries operating in neutral territories such as Cyprus and Crete, explored possibilities for cooperation against the common Hittite threat. Egyptian diplomatic archives from Thebes preserve references to these early contacts, describing Mitanni proposals for coordinated military action and territorial agreements that would formalize spheres of influence in Syria. The Egyptian court's receptiveness to Mitanni diplomatic overtures reflected similar concerns about Hittite expansion that threatened pharaonic interests in northern Syria and Anatolia. Thutmose IV, who had succeeded to the Egyptian throne around 1401 BC, inherited military commitments across the Levant that strained Egyptian resources while providing limited strategic benefits. The prospect of securing Mitanni cooperation offered opportunities to consolidate Egyptian control over core territories in Palestine and southern Syria, while reducing military expenditures required for maintaining northern frontiers. The formal peace negotiations that commenced around 1395 BC took place at Damascus, chosen for its neutral status and convenient location for representatives from both empires. The negotiating process extended over several months, with detailed discussions covering territorial boundaries, trade relationships, military cooperation agreements, and the complex protocol requirements for diplomatic relations between sovereign powers. Cuneiform tablets from Mari preserve portions of these negotiations, revealing the sophisticated legal frameworks that governed international relations during this period. The territorial provisions of the emerging treaty reflected pragmatic recognition of existing military realities rather than idealistic diplomatic principles. Egyptian negotiators accepted Mitanni control over northern Syria and upper Mesopotamia, including the crucial commercial centres of Carchemish and Harran, while Mitanni representatives acknowledged Egyptian sovereignty over Palestine and southern Syria. The boundary demarcation followed natural geographic features, with the Orontes River Valley serving as the primary dividing line between the two spheres of influence. Commercial clauses within the treaty established frameworks for peaceful trade relationships that had been disrupted by decades of military conflict. These provisions guaranteed safe passage for merchants travelling between Egyptian and Mitanni territories, standardised customs procedures and taxation rates, and created dispute resolution mechanisms for commercial disagreements. Archaeological evidence from trading posts along the newly established borders indicates rapid implementation of these commercial agreements, with Egyptian and Mitanni goods appearing in previously restricted markets within months of treaty ratification. The most innovative aspect of the diplomatic agreement involved the establishment of formal marriage alliances between the Egyptian and Mitanni royal families. This practice, while not unknown in ancient Near Eastern diplomacy, had never been implemented on such a comprehensive scale or with such detailed protocol specifications. The marriage of Shutana II's daughter to Thutmose IV represented the cornerstone of this diplomatic revolution, symbolising the transformation from military rivalry to strategic partnership. The elaborate preparations for this royal marriage reveal the sophisticated ceremonial requirements that governed high-level diplomatic relationships. Egyptian records describe the assembly of a magnificent bridal procession that included hundreds of attendants, vast quantities of precious gifts, and elaborate ceremonial equipment designed to demonstrate Mitanni wealth and cultural sophistication. The bride's dowry included gold jewellery, silver vessels, fine textiles, and trained horses that represented some of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world. Mitanni preparations for the marriage ceremony incorporated both traditional Hurrian customs and new diplomatic protocols designed to emphasize the equality of the two royal houses. The bride received extensive education in Egyptian court etiquette, religious practices, and administrative procedures that would enable her to function effectively within pharaonic society. This educational program, supervised by experienced diplomats from both kingdoms, established precedents for future marriage alliances that would become standard features of ancient Near Eastern international relations. The Amarna letters, discovered in the ruins of Akhenaten's capital city, provide unprecedented insights into the detailed diplomatic correspondence that sustained Egyptian-Mitanni relations throughout this alliance period. These cuneiform tablets, numbering over 350 documents, preserve actual diplomatic exchanges between royal courts that reveal the complex protocols governing international relations. The correspondence demonstrates sophisticated understanding of diplomatic etiquette, with careful attention to proper forms of address, gift-giving procedures, and communication protocols that maintained royal dignity while facilitating practical cooperation. King Tushratta's letters to Amenhotep III illustrate the intimate nature of relationships that developed between the allied royal families. These communications discuss personal family matters, health concerns, and domestic issues alongside formal diplomatic business, creating bonds of friendship that transcended purely political considerations. The letters reveal Tushratta's genuine affection for his Egyptian counterpart, describing shared interests in hunting, chariot racing, and religious ceremonies that provided common ground for personal relationships. The gift exchange systems documented in the Amarna correspondence demonstrate the economic dimensions of diplomatic relationships that extended far beyond symbolic gestures. Mitanni presents to the Egyptian court included elaborate golden jewellery, precious stones, fine horses, and luxury textiles that represented significant economic value while displaying the kingdom's wealth and craftsmanship capabilities. Egyptian reciprocal gifts featured gold ornaments, exotic animals, rare spices, and manufactured goods that showcased pharaonic prosperity and technological achievements. These diplomatic gift exchanges served multiple functions within the broader framework of international relations, establishing precedents for commercial relationships while demonstrating mutual respect between sovereign powers. The careful documentation of gift values and specifications created legal records that could be referenced in future negotiations, while the public display of foreign presence enhanced royal prestige and demonstrated successful diplomatic achievements to domestic audiences. The detailed correspondence regarding diplomatic protocols reveals the sophisticated ceremonial requirements that governed interactions between representatives of different kingdoms. Mitanni ambassadors to Egypt received extensive briefings on proper court etiquette, including appropriate dress codes, speaking procedures, and gift presentation ceremonies that would avoid inadvertent diplomatic insults. These protocols reflected deep cultural differences between Egyptian and Mitanni societies, while establishing frameworks for respectful interaction despite these differences. Military cooperation agreements between Egypt and Mitanni focused primarily on coordinated responses to Hittite expansion, rather than joint offensive operations against other powers. The two kingdoms established intelligence sharing arrangements that provided early warning of Hittite military preparations, while diplomatic coordination ensured consistent responses to Hittite diplomatic initiatives throughout Syria and Mesopotamia. These arrangements proved particularly valuable during Hittite campaigns against Syrian city-states that might otherwise have fallen to Anatolian forces through divide-and-conquer tactics. The practical implementation of military cooperation involved complex logistical arrangements that tested the administrative capabilities of both kingdoms. Joint military operations required coordination of supply lines, communication systems, and command structures that had never been attempted on such a scale. Egyptian and Mitanni military engineers collaborated on fortification projects that protected crucial border regions, while intelligence officers developed shared networks that monitored Hittite activities across multiple theatres of operation. Archaeological evidence from Syrian border fortifications reveals the tangible results of Egyptian-Mitanni military cooperation during this period. Defensive installations at sites such as Tel Afis show construction techniques that combine Egyptian engineering expertise with Mitanni knowledge of local terrain and materials. These fortifications featured multiple defensive lines, underground communication tunnels, and specialized positions for chariot operations that reflected lessons learned from previous conflicts with Hittite forces. The coordination of diplomatic initiatives represented another crucial aspect of Egyptian-Mitanni cooperation that extended beyond purely military considerations. Both kingdoms recognized the importance of maintaining Syrian city-state allegiances through consistent diplomatic pressure that prevented Hittite agents from exploiting disagreements between the allied powers. Joint diplomatic missions to key Syrian centres demonstrated unified Egyptian Mitanni positions, while offering coordinated incentives for continued loyalty to the alliance. The development of shared intelligence networks required unprecedented cooperation between Egyptian and Mitanni administrative systems that had previously operated as adversaries. Intelligence officers from both kingdoms received cross-training in each other's languages, customs, and operational procedures, creating professional relationships that transcended traditional political boundaries. These intelligence-sharing arrangements provided both kingdoms with comprehensive understanding of Hittite capabilities and intentions that neither could have achieved independently. The economic benefits of the Egyptian-Mitanni alliance extended throughout both kingdoms as peaceful trade relationships replaced costly military confrontations. Mitanni merchants gained access to Egyptian markets for luxury goods, horses, and manufactured products that had been prohibited during the conflict period, while Egyptian traders could operate safely in northern Syrian territories that had previously been hostile. These expanded commercial relationships generated tax revenues that helped finance continued military preparations against the Hittite threat. Agricultural cooperation between the allied kingdoms involved sharing of irrigation techniques, crop varieties, and farming methods that improved productivity in both regions. Egyptian expertise in Nile Valley agriculture proved adaptable to Mesopotamian conditions, while Mitanni knowledge of dryland farming techniques offered solutions to Egyptian agricultural challenges in marginal areas. These technical exchanges created lasting improvements in agricultural productivity that continued long after the political alliance had ended. The cultural exchanges that accompanied diplomatic cooperation produced lasting influences on art, literature, and religious practices in both kingdoms. Mitanni artistic motifs appeared in Egyptian decorative arts, while Egyptian architectural techniques influenced Mitanni construction projects. These cultural borrowings created hybrid artistic styles that reflected the cosmopolitan nature of ancient Near Eastern civilization during this period of intensive international cooperation. The succession of Tushratta to the Mitanni throne around 1350 BC marked the beginning of the kingdom's most prosperous and culturally sophisticated period, built upon the diplomatic foundations established by his predecessor's alliance with Egypt. Archaeological excavations at Washukani reveal extensive construction projects initiated during the early years of Tushratta's reign, including the expansion of the royal palace complex with specialized quarters for foreign diplomats, elaborate reception halls decorated with imported materials, and administrative buildings equipped with advanced record-keeping facilities. The scale and sophistication of these constructions demonstrate the kingdom's accumulated wealth and the confidence of its rulers in their long-term political stability. Tushratta's military campaigns against Assyria during the 1340s BC represented the pinnacle of Mitanni military achievement, combining traditional chariot warfare tactics with innovative siege techniques that proved devastatingly effective against Assyrian defensive positions. The Mitanni assault on Ashur itself, documented in both Mitanni royal inscriptions and later Assyrian chronicles, involved coordinated attacks by multiple chariot squadrons, supported by specialized siege equipment that included bronze-reinforced battering rams, mobile siege towers, and sophisticated archery platforms. Archaeological evidence from Tel Rima indicates the systematic destruction of Assyrian military installations throughout the Upper Tigris region, followed by the establishment of Mitanni administrative centres that controlled crucial river crossings and trade routes. The tactical innovations employed during these Assyrian campaigns reflected decades of military evolution under Indo-Aryan leadership, with Mitanni forces demonstrating unprecedented coordination between different military units. Chariot squadrons executed complex flanking maneuvers that isolated Assyrian infantry formations, while specialized assault troops equipped with scaling ladders and grappling equipment systematically breached urban fortifications. The integration of Hurrian infantry contingents with Indo-Aryan chariot elites created combined arms formations that maximized the strengths of both military traditions while minimizing their respective weaknesses. The successful capture of Arrapha, a crucial Assyrian stronghold controlling access to the Zagros mountain passes, demonstrated Mitanni capabilities in sustained siege warfare that had previously been considered beyond the kingdom's military reach. The siege lasted approximately 8 months, with Mitanni engineers constructing elaborate circumvallation works that prevented Assyrian relief expeditions from reaching the defenders while maintaining supply lines for the attacking forces. Archaeological investigation of the siege works reveals sophisticated engineering solutions, including drainage systems, defensive positions, and supply depots that enabled Mitanni forces to maintain effective military pressure despite the extended duration of the operation. The psychological impact of these military victories extended far beyond their immediate strategic consequences, establishing Tushratta's reputation as the preeminent military leader of his generation throughout the ancient Near East. Diplomatic correspondence from Syrian city-states during this period reveals widespread recognition of Mitanni military supremacy, with local rulers voluntarily offering tribute payments and military support in exchange for protection against potential enemies. These voluntary submissions expanded Mitanni influence across northern Syria without requiring additional military campaigns, demonstrating the kingdom's successful transition from conquest-based expansion to influence-based hegemony. The maintenance of Syrian territories under Tushratta's rule involved sophisticated administrative arrangements that balanced central control with local autonomy, creating stable political relationships that endured for decades. Mitanni governors appointed to major Syrian cities typically came from established Hurrian administrative families with extensive experience in managing diverse populations, while local rulers retained authority over internal affairs in exchange for regular tribute payments and military obligations. Archaeological evidence from Damascus and Aleppo reveals the construction of Mitanni administrative compounds featuring standardized architectural elements, secure communication facilities, and residential quarters for permanent diplomatic staff. The extensive diplomatic correspondence between Tushratta and the Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep III and Akhenaten provides unprecedented insights into the sophisticated court culture that flourished at Washukani during this Golden Age period. These letters, preserved in the Amarna archive, reveal a level of cultural refinement and intellectual sophistication that rivaled the greatest courts of the ancient world. Tushratta's correspondence demonstrates mastery of diplomatic protocol, literary expression, and complex political analysis that reflects extensive education in multiple languages, legal traditions, and international customs. The Mitanni court's cultural sophistication manifested itself through elaborate ceremonial procedures that incorporated elements from various ancient Near Eastern traditions while maintaining distinctly Hurrian characteristics. Royal audiences featured carefully choreographed presentations that displayed the kingdom's wealth through the use of precious materials, exotic animals, and elaborate costumes that demonstrated Mitanni connections to trade networks spanning from the Aegean Sea to the Iranian plateau. Foreign ambassadors consistently reported their amazement at the splendor of Mitanni court ceremonies, with Egyptian diplomatic records describing throne room decorations that included gold-plated furniture, silk wall hangings, and precious stone inlays that created dazzling visual displays. The development of Mitanni literary culture during Tushratta's reign produced sophisticated works in both Hurrian and Akkadian languages that influenced intellectual development throughout the region. Royal scribes composed epic poems celebrating Mitanni military victories, legal treatises codifying administrative procedures, and religious texts that synthesized various theological traditions. Archaeological discoveries at scribal schools in major Mitanni cities reveal extensive libraries containing works on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering that demonstrate the kingdom's commitment to intellectual advancement alongside military and political achievements. The economic prosperity that characterized Tushratta's reign resulted from the successful integration of agricultural production, commercial taxation, and tribute collection into a comprehensive fiscal system that generated unprecedented government revenues. The fertile Kabur Valley produced massive grain surpluses that supported urban populations while providing export commodities for international trade, while expanded irrigation networks increased cultivated area by an estimated 30% compared to previous periods. Archaeological surveys of Mitanni agricultural installations reveal sophisticated water management systems, including reservoirs, distribution channels, and drainage networks that maximized agricultural productivity while preventing soil degradation. Commercial taxation provided another crucial revenue stream that reflected the kingdom's strategic position astride major trade routes connecting Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Levant. Mitanni customs posts processed caravans carrying tin from Anatolian mines, copper from Cyprus, silver from the Zagros Mountains, and luxury goods from as far away as India and Central Asia. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency systems throughout Mitanni territory facilitated long-distance commerce while ensuring consistent tax collection that contributed substantially to royal treasuries. The tribute relationships established with Syrian vassal states generated additional revenues that enabled Tushratta to finance ambitious construction projects and maintain large military forces without imposing excessive taxation on core Mitanni territories. These tributary arrangements typically involved annual payments of precious metals, luxury goods, and specialized products that reflected each region's particular economic strengths. Archaeological evidence from tribute collection centers reveals sophisticated accounting systems that tracked payments from individual vassal states while maintaining detailed records of military obligations and commercial privileges. Luxury goods production within Mitanni territory reached unprecedented levels of sophistication during this period, with royal workshops producing jewellery, textiles, and decorative objects that rivaled the finest products of contemporary civilizations. Mitanni goldsmiths developed advanced techniques for creating intricate filigree work, while textile producers experimented with imported silk fibres and exotic dyes that created fabrics of exceptional quality and beauty. Archaeological discoveries of workshop areas reveal specialized tools, raw materials, and finished products that demonstrate the kingdom's technological capabilities and artistic achievements. The monumental architecture undertaken during Tushratta's reign transformed the physical landscape of major Mitanni cities, creating impressive urban environments that reflected the kingdom's wealth and cultural sophistication. The expansion of Washukani included the construction of massive palace complexes featuring throne rooms capable of accommodating hundreds of courtiers, residential quarters for royal family members and high-ranking officials, and specialized facilities for diplomatic receptions and ceremonial functions. Archaeological investigation of these structures reveals construction techniques that combine traditional Mesopotamian building methods with architectural innovations that improve structural stability and aesthetic appeal. Religious architecture also flourished during this period, with the construction of elaborate temple complexes dedicated to major Hurrian deities that served as centers for both worship and community activities. The Great Temple of Tashub at Washukani, known from later Assyrian descriptions, featured a massive ziggurat-style tower surrounded by courtyards, administrative buildings, and residential quarters for priestly personnel. Archaeological evidence from similar temple complexes at other Mitanni sites reveals sophisticated architectural planning that integrated religious functions with economic activities, including craft production agricultural processing and commercial storage. The extensive trade networks that operated during Tushratta's reign connected Mitanni territories to markets throughout the known world, facilitating cultural exchange alongside commercial transactions. Mitanni merchants established permanent trading posts in major commercial centres from Crete to Bactria, creating networks that transmitted not only goods but also ideas, technologies and artistic influences across vast distances. Archaeological evidence of Mitanni commercial activities includes distinctive pottery styles, metalwork techniques, and decorative motifs that appear in contexts ranging from Mycenaean Greece to the Indus Valley. The development of these international trade relationships required sophisticated diplomatic arrangements that protected merchant activities while generating revenue for participating governments. Tushratta's diplomatic correspondence includes detailed discussions of commercial treaties that establish standardized procedures for dispute resolution, currency exchange, and the protection of foreign merchants operating within Mitanni territory. These arrangements created stable frameworks for long-distance commerce that contributed to economic prosperity throughout the region. The religious and cultural developments that occurred during Tushratta's reign reflected the cosmopolitan nature of Mitanni society and its openness to influences from diverse sources. The prominence of Hurrian deities such as Teshub and Hepat within the royal pantheon provided continuity with traditional religious practices while accommodating Indo-Aryan divine figures and Syrian local deities that reflected the kingdom's diverse population. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals syncretic practices that combined elements from multiple theological traditions into coherent religious systems that served the spiritual needs of multi-ethnic communities. The worship of Teshub, the Hurrian storm god, reached particular prominence during this period as royal patronage supported the construction of magnificent temples and the development of elaborate ritual practices. Teshub's role as both weather deity and divine warrior made him particularly appealing to Mitanni rulers who sought divine sanction for their military campaigns and agricultural policies. Archaeological discoveries of religious artifacts reveal sophisticated iconographic programs that depicted Teshub in various aspects, from benevolent rainbringer to terrible destroyer of enemies, reflecting the complex theological concepts that characterized mature Hurrian religious thought. The goddess Hepat, consort of Teshub and protector of royal families, received similar royal attention through the establishment of temples staffed by highly trained priestesses who performed elaborate ceremonies on behalf of the ruling dynasty. The cult of Hepat incorporated elements from various goddess traditions throughout the ancient Near East, creating syncretic religious practices that appealed to diverse populations within the Mitanni kingdom. Archaeological evidence from Hepat temples reveals sophisticated ritual equipment, including ceremonial vessels, musical instruments, and decorative objects that demonstrate the wealth and artistic sophistication devoted to religious activities. The influence of Mitanni religious practices extended far beyond the kingdom's political boundaries, with Hurrian deities and ritual practices appearing in religious contexts throughout Syria, Anatolia, and even Egypt. This religious influence reflected the cultural prestige that Mitanni civilization had achieved during its golden age, as foreign courts adopted Mitanni religious elements alongside diplomatic and commercial relationships. The spread of Hurrian religious terminology and concepts throughout the region created lasting cultural legacies that persisted long after the kingdom's political decline. The assassination of Tushratta around 1320 BC shattered the carefully constructed political edifice that had sustained Mitanni's golden age, plunging the kingdom into a devastating succession crisis that would fundamentally alter the balance of power throughout the ancient Near East. Contemporary Assyrian chronicles describe the murder as occurring during a royal hunting expedition in the hills east of Washukani, where Tushratta's own bodyguards turned against him in a conspiracy that likely involved multiple court factions dissatisfied with his policies toward Egypt and Assyria. The king's body, according to these accounts, was discovered by shepherds 3 days after his disappearance, bearing multiple stab wounds that indicated a prolonged struggle before his death. The immediate aftermath of Tushratta's assassination revealed the deep factional divisions that had been festering beneath the surface of Mitanni court politics throughout the preceding decades. 2 primary claimants emerged to contest the succession: Artatama II, who claimed legitimacy through his descent from an earlier branch of the royal family, and Shatana III, Tushratta's designated heir who commanded the loyalty of court officials and military commanders who had served under his father. Archaeological evidence from Washukani suggests that the capital itself was physically divided between supporters of the rival claimants, with different quarters of the city controlled by armed factions that erected barricades and defensive positions to protect their territories. Artatama II's supporters consisted primarily of nobles who had opposed Tushratta's pro-Egyptian policies and favoured a more aggressive stance toward Assyrian expansion in the east. These faction members included veteran military commanders who had participated in earlier campaigns against Assyria, court officials who controlled access to royal treasuries, and provincial governors who commanded substantial military forces in outlying territories. Their political program emphasized traditional Mitanni independence from foreign alliances while promising to restore the kingdom's military prestige through renewed conquests in Mesopotamia. The resources controlled by Artatama's faction included several major provincial centres in eastern Mitanni territory, where local governors had declared their allegiance to his cause and begun mobilizing military forces for the anticipated civil war. Archaeological surveys of sites such as Tel Leilan and Tel Mozan reveal evidence of hasty fortification construction during this period, with defensive earthworks and weapon caches that indicate systematic preparation for prolonged military conflict. These preparations included the stockpiling of bronze weapons, the construction of siege equipment, and the establishment of supply depots that could sustain military operations over extended periods. Shatana III's faction drew its strength from different sources within Mitanni society, particularly the professional administrative class that had managed the kingdom's complex diplomatic relationships and the younger generation of military officers who had risen to prominence during Tushratta's successful campaigns. These supporters controlled the central government apparatus in Washukani, including the royal treasury, diplomatic archives, and communication networks that connected the capital to vassal states throughout Syria. Their political strategy focused on maintaining the Egyptian alliance, while presenting themselves as the legitimate continuation of Tushratta's successful policies. The military forces available to Shatana's faction included the elite chariot squadrons that had formed the core of Mitanni armies during the kingdom's period of greatest expansion. These units, based primarily in the Kabur Valley region, possessed superior equipment and training compared to provincial forces, but their numbers were limited by the specialized nature of chariot warfare and the extensive resources required to maintain horse breeding programs. Archaeological evidence from military installations near Washukani reveals weapons caches containing hundreds of bronze-tipped arrows, chariot components, and horse harnesses that indicate substantial preparation for mobile warfare operations. The civil war that erupted between these rival factions devastated the Mitanni kingdom's military capabilities and economic infrastructure, creating opportunities for external enemies to exploit the kingdom's internal weakness. Contemporary Hittite records describe raids launched against Mitanni territory, while the rival claimants were engaged in fighting each other, with Hittite forces capturing several important border fortresses that had previously been considered impregnable. These Hittite successes encouraged other regional powers to test Mitanni defences, creating a cascade of military pressures that further weakened the kingdom's strategic position. The initial phases of the civil war centred on control of Washukani itself, where street fighting between rival factions caused extensive damage to the capital's infrastructure and administrative facilities. Archaeological excavations in the palace quarter reveal destruction layers containing burned administrative records, damaged storage facilities, and evidence of systematic looting that indicates the breakdown of central authority. The royal treasury appears to have been divided between the competing factions, with precious metals and luxury goods distributed to supporters as payment for continued loyalty during the uncertain succession period. Provincial territories throughout the Mitanni kingdom declared allegiance to one faction or the other based on complex calculations that weighed local interests against broader strategic considerations. Eastern provinces, which faced direct pressure from Assyrian expansion, generally supported Artatama II's promises of renewed military resistance, while Western territories that depended on trade relationships with Egyptian-controlled Syria favoured Shetana III's commitment to maintaining existing diplomatic arrangements. These regional divisions created a patchwork of competing authorities that made coordinated military action increasingly difficult for either claimant. The intervention of Suppiluliuma first fundamentally altered the dynamics of the Mitanni succession crisis, transforming what had been an internal political dispute into a proxy conflict that served Hittite strategic interests. The Hittite king's decision to support Artatama II reflected careful analysis of the relative strengths of the competing factions and recognition that a Mitanni ruler dependent on Hittite military support would be more amenable to Anatolian interests than a legitimate heir with independent power bases. Hittite military records describe the dispatch of substantial forces to support Artatama's cause, including veteran infantry units, siege equipment, and logistical support that proved decisive in several key engagements. The Hittite military intervention began with coordinated attacks against Shetana III's strongholds in the Kabul Valley, where Suppiluliuma's forces employed siege techniques that had been refined during decades of an Anatolian warfare. These assaults targeted the agricultural infrastructure that supported Mitanni chariot forces, destroying irrigation systems and grain storage facilities that were essential for maintaining large numbers of horses and their human handlers. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Tel Brak reveals systematic destruction of agricultural installations during this period, with canal systems deliberately filled with debris and storage buildings burned to prevent their future use. The psychological impact of Hittite intervention proved as significant as its immediate military effects, as Mitanni nobles began to question whether either claimant possessed sufficient strength to maintain the kingdom's independence against external pressures. Diplomatic correspondence from Syrian vassal states during this period reveals growing uncertainty about Mitanni's ability to provide effective protection, with local rulers beginning to explore alternative alliance arrangements that might offer greater security. These diplomatic shifts weakened both Mitanni factions by reducing their access to tribute revenues and military support from Syrian territories. Suppiluliuma's strategic objectives extended beyond simply installing a compliant ruler in Washukani to encompass the systematic dismantling of Mitanni's capacity for independent military action. Hittite forces captured key fortified positions that controlled access routes between different parts of the Mitanni kingdom, preventing effective coordination between provincial armies and the central government. The occupation of these strategic points created permanent Hittite military presence within traditional Mitanni territory, establishing facts on the ground that would persist regardless of which claimant ultimately achieved formal recognition as king. The siege of Carchemish represented the most significant Hittite military achievement during this intervention, as the capture of this crucial commercial centre provided direct access to Syrian trade networks while demonstrating Hittite capability to project power far from Anatolian bases. The city's location at the confluence of major trade routes made its control essential for any power seeking to dominate northern Syria, while its massive fortifications had previously been considered among the strongest defensive positions in the region. Archaeological investigation of Carchemish reveals evidence of systematic siege operations that included the construction of earthwork ramps, the deployment of battering rams, and coordinated assaults that eventually breached the city's defences. The fall of Carchemish sent shockwaves throughout the region as rulers and merchants recognized that traditional assumptions about defensive capabilities and strategic balances no longer applied. Hittite control of the city provided direct access to Mediterranean trade networks while cutting crucial supply lines that had sustained Mitanni influence in western Syria. The economic implications of this loss extended far beyond immediate military considerations, as Carchemish had served as a major collection point for tribute payments from Syrian vassal states and a distribution centre for luxury goods that demonstrated Mitanni wealth and power. Aleppo's subsequent capitulation to Hittite forces completed the dismantling of Mitanni's western territorial holdings, as local rulers calculated that resistance would be futile given the demonstrated effectiveness of Suppiluliuma's military machine. The city's surrender negotiations, preserved in Hittite diplomatic archives, reveal the comprehensive nature of arrangements that transfer control over not only urban centres but also surrounding agricultural territories, trade routes, and tributary relationships. These agreements established direct Hittite administration over territories that had been under Mitanni influence for over a century, representing a fundamental shift in regional power structures. The Egyptian response to these dramatic developments revealed the limitations of pharaonic commitment to the Mitanni alliance when confronted with changing strategic realities. Amenhotep IV, who had recently assumed power in Egypt and was preoccupied with religious reforms and internal political changes, proved reluctant to commit substantial military resources to supporting either Mitanni claimant against Hittite intervention. Egyptian diplomatic archives from this period describe lengthy court debates about the costs and benefits of military involvement in Mesopotamian affairs, with many officials arguing that Egyptian interests would be better served by accommodating Hittite expansion rather than opposing it. The Egyptian decision to abandon active support for Mitanni represented a calculated assessment that the kingdom's internal divisions and external pressures had rendered it an unreliable ally whose continued independence could not be assured regardless of Egyptian military assistance. Pharaonic strategic planners recognized that Hittite control over northern Syria was becoming inevitable and began exploring diplomatic arrangements that would protect Egyptian interests in Palestine and southern Syria while accepting Anatolian dominance in northern territories. These policy shifts reflected pragmatic recognition that the regional balance of power had shifted decisively in favour of Hittite expansion. The diplomatic isolation that resulted from Egyptian abandonment left both Mitanni claimants increasingly dependent on external support for their survival, creating conditions that facilitated foreign intervention in the kingdom's internal affairs. Artatama II's reliance on Hittite military assistance transformed him from an independent ruler into essentially a Hittite vassal, whose authority derived from Anatolian support rather than legitimate claim to the throne. This dependency relationship established patterns of foreign control that would characterize Mitanni politics for the remainder of the kingdom's existence. Shetana III's position became increasingly untenable as Hittite military successes eliminated his territorial base and reduced his access to resources necessary for continued resistance. Archaeological evidence from sites that remained under his control reveals signs of economic deterioration, including reduced construction activity, simplified pottery production, and evidence of population decline that indicate the severe impact of prolonged civil war on civilian populations. These conditions made it increasingly difficult for Shetana to maintain the loyalty of his supporters, who faced growing pressure to accept Hittite-sponsored settlement terms. The transformation of Mitanni from an independent regional power into a Hittite client state represented one of the most significant geopolitical changes in ancient Near Eastern history during the 14th century BC. This transition involved not only changes in political leadership but also fundamental alterations in administrative structures, military organization, and economic relationships that would reshape the kingdom's character for generations. The installation of Artatama II as a Hittite-sponsored ruler established precedents for foreign intervention in Mitanni affairs that would persist throughout the kingdom's remaining history. The territorial losses suffered during this succession crisis permanently reduced Mitanni's strategic capabilities and economic resources, creating a weakened kingdom that could no longer compete effectively with its regional rivals. The loss of Syrian territories eliminated crucial sources of tribute revenue while reducing the kingdom's access to Mediterranean trade networks that had provided luxury goods and exotic materials. These economic constraints limited Mitanni's ability to maintain large military forces or undertake ambitious construction projects that had characterized the kingdom during its golden age under Tushratta. The installation of Shatiwasa as king of Mitanni around 1300 BC marked the beginning of a fundamentally different chapter in the kingdom's history, as the new ruler's authority derived not from traditional legitimacy or popular support, but from Hittite military backing and formal recognition by Suppiluliuma I. The treaty that established this arrangement, preserved in cuneiform tablets from Bogazkoi, reveals the comprehensive nature of Mitanni's subordination to Hittite interests, with detailed clauses specifying tribute obligations, military support requirements, and territorial concessions that reduced the once mighty kingdom to a buffer state serving Anatolian strategic priorities. Shatiwasa's coronation ceremony, conducted according to traditional Hurrian protocols, but overseen by Hittite officials, symbolized this uncomfortable fusion of indigenous customs with foreign oversight that would characterize Mitanni governance throughout this period. The reduced territorial extent of the Mitanni kingdom under Hittite suzerainty encompassed primarily the core regions of the Khabur River Valley, with eastern boundaries that fluctuated according to Assyrian military pressure and western frontiers that remained under direct Hittite administration. Archaeological surveys of former Mitanni territories reveal the systematic dismantling of the administrative installations that had previously coordinated provincial governance, with many sites showing evidence of deliberate destruction followed by abandonment rather than reconstruction under new management. The capital at Washukani retained its ceremonial importance but lost much of its practical administrative function, as key decisions affecting Mitanni territories were increasingly made in consultation with Hittite advisors or referred directly to the Anatolian court for resolution. Shatiwasa's early attempts to assert independent authority within these constrained circumstances demonstrated both the limitations of his position and his determination to preserve some measure of Mitanni autonomy. His efforts to rebuild the kingdom's military capabilities focused on reconstructing chariot squadrons that had been decimated during the succession crisis, though these forces remained small in comparison to the armies that had served previous Mitanni rulers. Archaeological evidence from military installations near Washukani reveals the construction of new stabling facilities and training grounds, but the scale of these projects reflects the reduced resources available to the vassal kingdom compared to its predecessor's extensive military infrastructure. The tribute obligations imposed by the Hittite suzerainty treaty placed severe strains on Mitanni's already weakened economy, requiring annual payments of precious metals, luxury goods, and military equipment that represented substantial portions of the kingdom's total production. Hittite administrative records describe tribute deliveries that included gold jewellery, silver vessels, fine textiles, trained horses, and bronze weapons that demonstrated Mitanni craftsmanship while depleting the kingdom's accumulated wealth. These tribute requirements forced Mitanni administrators to develop more efficient taxation systems that extracted resources from agricultural and commercial activities with unprecedented intensity, creating economic pressures that affected all levels of society. The agricultural foundation of Mitanni's economy underwent significant reorganization as administrators sought to maximize production within the kingdom's reduced territorial boundaries. Irrigation systems in the Khabur Valley received renewed attention and investment, with canal networks expanded and improved to increase cultivated area and crop yields. Archaeological investigation of these irrigation works reveals sophisticated engineering solutions that maximize water distribution efficiency while minimizing maintenance requirements, indicating continued technological capability despite political subordination. However, the increased agricultural output served primarily to meet tribute obligations rather than improve living conditions for the general population. Commercial activities within Mitanni territory faced new restrictions and taxation burdens that reflected the kingdom's subordinate status within the Hittite sphere of influence. Merchants travelling through Mitanni territories encountered multiple taxation points where Hittite officials collected customs duties alongside traditional Mitanni levies, creating cost burdens that reduced the profitability of long-distance trade. Archaeological evidence from trading posts along major caravan routes reveals the construction of additional administrative facilities designed to process and tax commercial traffic, while the volume of luxury goods found in archaeological context suggests reduced commercial activity compared to earlier periods. The gradual erosion of Mitanni territorial control began almost immediately after Shatuwaza's installation, as neighbouring powers recognised the kingdom's weakened condition and began testing its defensive capabilities. Assyrian forces under Adad-nirari first launched systematic campaigns against Mitanni's eastern provinces, employing siege warfare techniques that proved devastatingly effective against fortifications that had been designed to resist chariot attacks rather than prolonged infantry assaults. The fall of key border fortresses such as Taidu and Kahat provided Assyrian forces with forward bases for continued expansion, while demonstrating the inadequacy of Mitanni defensive preparations. The Assyrian military machine that confronted Mitanni during this period had evolved significantly from earlier encounters, incorporating lessons learned from decades of warfare against various regional opponents. Assyrian armies featured heavily armoured infantry formations equipped with iron weapons that provided substantial advantages over bronze-armed defenders, while their siege trains included sophisticated equipment capable of breaching the strongest fortifications. Archaeological excavations at sites captured during Assyrian campaigns reveal evidence of systematic siege operations that included the construction of earthwork ramps, deployment of battering rams, and coordinated assaults that eventually overwhelmed defensive positions. Adad-nirari I's strategic approach to Mitanni conquest emphasized the systematic occupation of agricultural territories that supported enemy military forces, rather than focusing exclusively on capturing fortified urban centres. Assyrian forces destroyed irrigation systems, burned grain storage facilities, and disrupted agricultural cycles in ways that made it impossible for Mitanni administrators to support large military formations in contested regions. This economic warfare proved particularly effective against a kingdom that depended heavily on agricultural surpluses to maintain its political and military structure, creating cascading effects that weakened Mitanni resistance throughout the eastern provinces. The capture of Arrapha by Assyrian forces represented a particularly significant loss for Mitanni, as this strategic fortress controlled access to trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with the Iranian plateau. The city's massive fortifications, which had withstood previous Assyrian attacks, finally succumbed to systematic siege operations that lasted over 6 months and involved the construction of elaborate circumvallation works that prevented relief expeditions from reaching the defenders. Archaeological investigation of the siege works reveals sophisticated engineering solutions, including drainage systems, defensive positions, and supply depots that enabled Assyrian forces to maintain effective military pressure despite the extended duration of the operation. The psychological impact of these Assyrian victories extended far beyond their immediate strategic consequences, as Mitanni, provincial governors and local administrators began questioning whether continued resistance served their interests better than accommodation with the expanding Assyrian kingdom. Diplomatic correspondence from this period reveals growing numbers of Mitanni officials who initiated secret negotiations with Assyrian representatives, offering to surrender their territories in exchange for favourable treatment under Assyrian administration. These defections created intelligence advantages for Assyrian forces while undermining Mitanni defensive coordination throughout the contested regions. Shatuwaza's responses to these territorial losses demonstrated both his determination to preserve Mitanni independence and his recognition of the kingdom's limited capabilities for effective resistance. His diplomatic initiatives focused on securing external support that might offset Assyrian military advantages, with particular attention to potential alliances with powers that shared interests in containing Assyrian expansion. The king's correspondence with Egyptian representatives explored possibilities for renewed military cooperation, though these discussions ultimately proved fruitless due to Egypt's preoccupation with internal political developments and reluctance to become involved in distant Mesopotamian conflicts. The most promising avenue for external support appeared to lie in renewed relationships with Hittite authorities, who had their own reasons for opposing unlimited Assyrian expansion in regions that bordered Anatolian territories. Shatuwaza's negotiations with Hittite officials sought to transform the existing suzerainty arrangement into a more active military alliance that would provide effective protection against Assyrian advances. These discussions reveal the complex dynamics of vassal relationships in the ancient Near East, where subordinate rulers could sometimes leverage their overlords' strategic interests to secure support for their own survival. However, Hittite responses to Mitanni requests for military assistance remained limited and conditional, reflecting the Anatolian kingdom's own strategic priorities and resource constraints. Hittite military forces were committed to campaigns in western Anatolia and northern Syria that took precedence over defending distant Mesopotamian territories, while Hittite administrators calculated that Mitanni's survival was less important than maintaining good relationships with other regional powers. The military support that Hittite authorities did provide consisted primarily of small contingents of specialized troops and limited quantities of advanced weapons, rather than the large-scale intervention that Mitanni's situation required. The administrative challenges facing Shatuwaza's government multiplied as territorial losses reduced the kingdom's tax base, while tribute obligations to Hittite overlords remained constant. Mitanni officials developed increasingly sophisticated methods for extracting resources from remaining territories, including new taxation categories that targeted commercial activities, craft production, and even subsistence agriculture in ways that had been considered excessive during earlier periods. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals the expansion of bureaucratic facilities designed to track and collect these various taxation streams, while legal documents describe disputes arising from the increased fiscal burdens imposed on civilian populations. The cultural impact of political subordination manifested itself through gradual changes in artistic expression, religious practices, and social customs that reflected Mitanni society's adaptation to its reduced circumstances. Royal patronage of artistic production declined significantly due to resource constraints, resulting in simplified decorative programs and reduced use of precious materials in ceremonial objects. Archaeological discoveries from palace contexts reveal a shift toward more modest artistic expression that emphasized traditional Hurrian motifs while incorporating elements borrowed from Hittite and Assyrian cultural traditions. Religious practices underwent subtle but significant modifications as Mitanni priests adapted traditional ceremonies to accommodate the kingdom's changed political status. The worship of Teshub, the Hurrian storm god who had served as patron deity of Mitanni military campaigns, incorporated new ritual elements that emphasized protection and survival rather than conquest and expansion. Archaeological evidence from temple sites reveals changes in votive offerings and ceremonial equipment that reflect these shifting religious emphases, with increased attention to defensive deities and reduced emphasis on martial aspects of divine worship. The preservation of Hurrian cultural identity became an increasingly conscious priority for Mitanni administrators, who recognized that political independence might be lost, but cultural distinctiveness could potentially survive. Educational programs in major urban centers emphasized instruction in Hurrian language and literature, while craftsmen received encouragement to maintain traditional production techniques, even when foreign markets preferred different styles. These cultural preservation efforts created tensions between practical adaptation to political realities and idealistic commitment to maintaining ancestral traditions. Shalmaneser I's succession to the Assyrian throne around 1274 BC brought renewed military pressure against Mitanni territories, as the new king sought to complete the conquest of regions that had remained under nominal Mitanni control despite previous Assyrian advances. Shalmaneser's military campaigns employed more systematic approaches to territorial occupation than his predecessors, with Assyrian forces establishing permanent administrative installations in conquered regions, while implementing population transfer policies that reduced the likelihood of future rebellions. Archaeological evidence from sites conquered during this period reveals the construction of distinctly Assyrian administrative buildings, alongside the systematic destruction of Mitanni governmental facilities. The siege of Washukani itself, undertaken by Shalmaneser's forces around 1270 BC, represented the ultimate test of Mitanni's capacity for independent survival under Shatiweza's leadership. The capital's defences, which had been strengthened during the early years of Shatiweza's reign, proved inadequate against Assyrian siege techniques that had been refined through decades of successful campaigns. The systematic approach employed by Assyrian engineers included the construction of siege ramps, deployment of battering rams, and coordinated assaults that gradually wore down defensive capabilities while preventing effective relief operations. The eventual fall of Washukani marked the effective end of Mitanni as an independent political entity, though Shatiweza managed to escape the city's capture and continue resistance from strongholds in the western regions of his kingdom. Archaeological excavations in the palace quarter reveal extensive destruction that indicates systematic looting and deliberate demolition of governmental facilities, while residential areas show evidence of population displacement and economic disruption that characterize the transition to Assyrian administration. The royal archives, which had preserved centuries of diplomatic correspondence and administrative records, were scattered and largely destroyed during the city's capture. The final phase of Mitanni resistance centered on remaining fortified positions in the Kabur Valley, where Shatiweza and his supporters attempted to maintain control over agricultural territories that could support continued military operations. These defensive efforts relied increasingly on guerrilla tactics that avoided direct confrontation with superior Assyrian forces while disrupting enemy supply lines and communication networks. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the construction of hidden supply caches, concealed defensive positions, and communication systems that enabled coordinated resistance activities across multiple locations. The gradual absorption of remaining Mitanni territories into the Assyrian administrative system proceeded through a combination of military conquest and diplomatic negotiation that reflected Assyrian recognition of the practical challenges involved in governing diverse populations across vast distances. Local administrators who demonstrated willingness to cooperate with Assyrian authorities often retained positions within the new governmental structure, while those who continued resistance faced systematic elimination and replacement with Assyrian appointees. These transition processes created hybrid administrative arrangements that preserved some elements of traditional Hurrian governance while implementing Assyrian legal and fiscal systems. The cultural legacy of Mitanni's Golden Age persisted in various forms despite the kingdom's political destruction, as Hurrian religious practices, artistic traditions, and technological innovations continued to influence developments throughout the region. Former Mitanni territories retained distinctive cultural characteristics that distinguished them from core Assyrian regions, while refugee populations carried Hurrian traditions to new locations where they merged with local customs to create syncretic cultural forms. The preservation of Hurrian language in religious and legal contexts ensured that key elements of Mitanni civilization survived the kingdom's political collapse. The systematic dismantling of Mitanni's remaining strongholds accelerated dramatically under Shalmaneser I's methodical campaign strategy, which prioritised the permanent elimination of Hurrian political authority rather than mere territorial occupation. Archaeological excavations at Tel Hamidia reveal the sophisticated siege works constructed by Assyrian engineers during their assault on this crucial Kabur Valley fortress, including massive earthen ramps that enabled battering rams to reach previously impregnable wall sections and elaborate tunnel systems designed to undermine defensive foundations. The fortress walls, constructed from massive limestone blocks quarried from nearby hills, showed evidence of systematic bombardment by stone-throwing engines that created breaches large enough for coordinated infantry assaults. The capture of Tel Hamidia provided Assyrian forces with a strategic base for operations throughout the central Kabur region, where several smaller Mitanni strongholds continued to resist under local commanders who had refused to acknowledge Assyrian authority. These secondary fortifications, typically built on natural hills and reinforced with mud brick walls, lacked the sophisticated defensive features of major urban centres, but compensated through their positions overlooking crucial agricultural territories and water sources. Assyrian military records describe the systematic reduction of these positions through coordinated campaigns that combined direct assault with economic warfare designed to starve defenders into submission. The siege of Dur-Katlimmu demonstrated the evolution of Assyrian military engineering capabilities, as attacking forces constructed elaborate siege works that included multiple parallel trenches, wooden siege towers reaching heights of over 20 metres, and specialised assault bridges that could be deployed across defensive ditches. The defenders, commanded by a Mitanni noble named Shedi Teshub according to fragmentary cuneiform sources, had prepared extensive countermeasures including underground passages for launching surprise attacks against siege works, and stockpiled supplies sufficient for extended resistance. Archaeological investigation of the siege perimeter reveals evidence of intense combat, with thousands of bronze and iron arrowheads scattered across the battlefield, alongside fragments of siege equipment and defensive installations. The psychological impact of these systematic conquests extended far beyond their immediate military significance, as surviving Mitanni administrators throughout the region recognized that continued resistance would result in complete destruction rather than negotiated surrender. Intelligence reports preserved in Assyrian archives describe the voluntary submission of numerous fortified positions whose commanders calculated that cooperation offered better prospects for personal survival than futile military resistance. These capitulations typically involved formal ceremonies where Mitanni nobles publicly acknowledged Assyrian sovereignty while receiving guarantees of personal safety and retention of local administrative positions under the new imperial system. Shalmaneser's campaign against the fortified city of Sakani revealed the comprehensive nature of Assyrian conquest procedures, which extended beyond military occupation to encompass systematic documentation of captured resources and population transfers designed to prevent future rebellions. The city's massive granaries, capable of storing grain supplies for thousands of inhabitants, were methodically emptied and their contents transported to Assyrian supply depots, while skilled craftsmen identified during the occupation were relocated to Assyrian cities where their expertise could serve imperial production requirements. Archaeological evidence from residential quarters indicates selective demolition of buildings associated with Mitanni administrative functions, while structures suitable for Assyrian governmental purposes were preserved and modified according to imperial architectural standards. The final assault on Washukani itself represented the culmination of Shalmaneser's systematic campaign to eliminate Mitanni political authority throughout the Kabul region. The capital's defences, which had been continuously strengthened since Shatuwaza's installation as king, featured multiple concentric walls constructed from fired brick and reinforced with bronze fittings that provided exceptional resistance to conventional siege equipment. Assyrian engineers responded by constructing the largest siege works documented in contemporary military records, including earthen ramps that required thousands of workers labouring for months to complete, and specialised siege engines capable of launching projectiles weighing over 100 kilograms against defensive installations. The systematic destruction of Washukani's administrative quarter eliminated the physical infrastructure that had sustained Mitanni governmental operations for over 2 centuries. Archaeological excavations reveal the deliberate demolition of the royal palace complex, where throne rooms decorated with precious metal inlays were stripped of valuable materials before the buildings were burned and their foundations covered with rubble. The royal archives, containing diplomatic correspondence and administrative records that documented Mitanni's interactions with regional powers, were scattered throughout the destruction debris, with many tablets showing evidence of deliberate breakage that suggests systematic efforts to eliminate historical records of Mitanni independence. The capture of the Great Temple of Teshub within Washukani's religious quarter demonstrated Assyrian recognition of the symbolic importance of eliminating Hurrian religious authority alongside political institutions. The temple's massive ziggurat, constructed from millions of mud bricks and featuring elaborate decorative programs celebrating Hurrian deities, was systematically dismantled, with its materials transported for use in Assyrian construction projects. The temple's extensive treasure chambers yielded thousands of precious objects, including gold jewellery, silver vessels, and ceremonial weapons that were incorporated into Assyrian royal collections or redistributed as rewards for military service. Population deportations from conquered Mitanni territories followed established Assyrian procedures designed to eliminate potential centres of resistance while providing skilled labour for imperial projects throughout Mesopotamia. Contemporary Assyrian administrative records describe the systematic identification and relocation of specific population categories, including skilled craftsmen, experienced administrators, and members of the former ruling elite who possessed knowledge valuable to imperial governance. These deportations typically involved the separation of families and the dispersal of related individuals across different regions to prevent the formation of exile communities that might organise future rebellions. The relocation of Hurrian metalworkers to Assyrian production centres in the Tigris Valley provided the empire with access to advanced bronze working techniques that had been developed in Mitanni workshops over generations. Archaeological evidence from Assyrian metalworking sites reveals the sudden appearance of sophisticated alloying methods and decorative techniques that correspond chronologically with the conquest of Mitanni territories. These technological transfers enhanced Assyrian military capabilities through improved weapon production, while contributing to the development of luxury goods that demonstrated imperial wealth and cultural sophistication. Agricultural specialists deported from the fertile Kabul Valley brought expertise in irrigation management and crop cultivation that proved valuable for expanding agricultural production in core Assyrian territories. The sophisticated water management systems developed in Mitanni territories, including canal networks that maximized distribution efficiency while preventing soil salinization, were replicated in Assyrian agricultural projects under the supervision of relocated Hurrian engineers. These knowledge transfers contributed to increased agricultural productivity that supported growing urban populations and expanded military forces throughout the Assyrian Empire. The systematic destruction of Mitanni's urban infrastructure extended beyond military targets to encompass commercial and residential facilities that had supported the kingdom's economic foundation. Archaeological surveys of major Mitanni cities reveal widespread evidence of deliberate demolition that eliminated marketplaces, workshops, and storage facilities essential for regional economic activity. The destruction of these commercial installations disrupted trade networks that had connected Anatolia, Syria, and Mesopotamia for centuries, forcing merchants to develop alternative routes that bypassed former Mitanni territories and reduced the economic importance of the Khabur Valley region. Tukulti-Ninurta I's succession to the Assyrian throne around 1243 BC brought renewed intensity to campaigns against remaining pockets of Mitanni resistance in remote regions of the kingdom's former territory. The new king's military strategy emphasized the complete elimination of Hurrian political structures through coordinated operations that combined large-scale military assaults with systematic administrative reorganization of conquered territories. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the construction of permanent Assyrian military installations at strategic locations throughout former Mitanni territory, indicating imperial commitment to maintaining long-term control over these regions. The Siege of Harran, one of the last major urban centres to maintain nominal independence under Mitanni authority, demonstrated the technological superiority that Assyrian forces had achieved through decades of military innovation and conquest experience. The city's ancient walls, constructed during earlier periods and reinforced with traditional Mesopotamian defensive techniques, proved inadequate against Assyrian siege equipment that included iron-reinforced battering rams, torsion artillery capable of launching heavy projectiles over long distances, and specialized assault ladders designed for rapid scaling of defensive walls. The systematic approach employed by Assyrian engineers included the construction of multiple siege camps that enabled coordinated attacks from different directions while maintaining secure supply lines to support extended operations. The cultural destruction that accompanied these final military campaigns extended beyond physical demolition to encompass systematic efforts to eliminate Hurrian religious practices and cultural traditions that might serve as focal points for future resistance movements. Assyrian administrators implemented policies that prohibited the use of Hurrian language in official contexts while requiring the adoption of Assyrian religious practices and cultural customs. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals the deliberate destruction of Hurrian cult objects and the replacement of traditional religious installations with facilities dedicated to Assyrian deities. The transformation of former Mitanni territories into standard Assyrian provinces involved comprehensive administrative reorganization that eliminated traditional governmental structures while implementing imperial bureaucratic systems. Assyrian governors appointed to administer these regions typically came from established administrative families with extensive experience in managing diverse populations, while local officials who demonstrated loyalty to the new imperial system could retain subordinate positions within the reorganized governmental hierarchy. Archaeological evidence from administrative centers reveals the construction of standardized governmental facilities that followed Assyrian architectural patterns while incorporating practical adaptations to local environmental conditions. The economic integration of former Mitanni territories into the Assyrian imperial system required substantial infrastructure development that connected these regions to established trade networks and administrative communication systems. Road construction projects undertaken during this period created reliable transportation routes that enabled rapid movement of military forces and commercial goods between different parts of the empire, while the establishment of way stations and supply depots facilitated long-distance travel and communication. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous construction projects from this period that demonstrate the scale of imperial investment in integrating conquered territories into the broader Assyrian administrative and economic framework. The gradual disappearance of distinctive Hurrian cultural markers from archaeological contexts throughout former Mitanni territories indicates the effectiveness of Assyrian assimilation policies that systematically eliminated indigenous cultural practices while promoting imperial customs and traditions. Pottery production in these regions shifted from traditional Hurrian styles to standardized Assyrian forms, while metalworking techniques adapted to imperial specifications that emphasized functionality over decorative elaboration. These cultural transformations reflected broader changes in social organization that replaced traditional Hurrian community structures with Assyrian administrative arrangements designed to facilitate imperial control and resource extraction. The archaeological record of destruction levels at major Mitanni sites provides dramatic evidence of the systematic nature of Assyrian conquest operations that eliminated not only political authority but also the physical infrastructure that had supported Hurrian civilization for centuries. Excavations at sites throughout the Kabul Valley reveal consistent patterns of burning and deliberate demolition that indicate coordinated destruction rather than random violence, with particular attention to eliminating governmental buildings, religious installations, and defensive fortifications that might serve future resistance efforts. The comprehensive nature of this destruction created cultural discontinuities that marked the definitive end of independent Hurrian political authority and the beginning of a new historical period characterized by Assyrian imperial dominance throughout northern Mesopotamia. The systematic destruction of Mitanni's political institutions did not extinguish the cultural flame that had burned throughout the Hurrian heartland for over half a millennium. Archaeological evidence from sites across northern Mesopotamia reveals a remarkable pattern of cultural persistence that defied Assyrian administrative policies designed to eliminate indigenous traditions. Excavations at Tel Mazan, ancient Urkesh, have uncovered residential quarters dating to the 12th and 11th centuries BC, where distinctly Hurrian pottery styles continue to be produced alongside officially mandated Assyrian ceramic forms. These vessels, characterized by their burnished red-slip surfaces and geometric incised decorations, maintain traditional manufacturing techniques that had been passed down through generations of Hurrian craftsmen despite the political upheavals that had transformed their world. The persistence of Hurrian religious practices within the Assyrian provincial system manifested itself through subtle adaptations that preserved core theological concepts while conforming to imperial religious requirements. Temple complexes throughout former Mitanni territory show evidence of continued worship of Hurrian deities, though often under Mesopotamian names that made such practices acceptable to Assyrian administrators. The great storm god Teshub, central figure of the Hurrian pantheon, continued to receive veneration through identification with the Assyrian deity Adad, while the goddess Hepat maintained her protective functions under various local appellations that reflected regional linguistic variations. Cuneiform tablets from Nutsi preserve ritual texts that demonstrate the sophisticated theological adaptations developed by Hurrian priests to maintain traditional worship practices within the constraints of imperial religious policy. These religious adaptations required considerable intellectual sophistication from Hurrian clergy who had to navigate the complex theological landscape created by imperial conquest. Priests developed syncretic ritual practices that incorporated Assyrian ceremonial elements while preserving essential Hurrian theological concepts, creating hybrid religious forms that satisfied imperial requirements without abandoning ancestral traditions. Archaeological discoveries of ritual objects from this period reveal the careful balance maintained by religious practitioners, with ceremonial vessels bearing traditional Hurrian decorative motifs, alongside inscriptions in Akkadian that identified them as appropriate for use in imperial religious contexts. The survival of Hurrian language in specialized contexts demonstrates the tenacious hold that indigenous cultural traditions maintained despite systematic pressure for assimilation. Legal documents from the 11th century BC, discovered in private archives throughout former Mitanni territory, preserve Hurrian terminology for property transactions, family relationships, and commercial agreements that had no precise equivalents in Akkadian or Assyrian legal vocabulary. These linguistic survivals indicate that Hurrian remained the preferred language for intimate community interactions, even as Akkadian became mandatory for official governmental and commercial purposes. Educational institutions that had formerly served Mitanni administrative needs transformed into centres for preserving Hurrian cultural knowledge under the guise of providing practical training for imperial service. Schools in major urban centres maintained instruction in Hurrian literature and historical traditions, while ostensibly preparing students for positions within the Assyrian administrative hierarchy. Archaeological evidence from scribal quarters in cities like Harran reveals libraries containing bilingual texts that preserved Hurrian epic poetry, religious hymns, and historical chronicles alongside the Akkadian translations required for official purposes. The role of deported Hurrian specialists in transmitting cultural elements throughout the ancient Near East created unexpected opportunities for cultural diffusion that extended Mitanni influence far beyond the kingdom's original territorial boundaries. Skilled craftsmen relocated to Assyrian production centres brought with them sophisticated techniques for metalworking, textile production, and ceramic manufacture that enhanced imperial capabilities while preserving traditional Hurrian artistic methods. Archaeological analysis of bronze objects from Assyrian workshops reveals the adoption of Hurrian decorative techniques that featured intricate geometric patterns and stylized animal motifs characteristic of traditional Mitanni artistic expression. Hurrian scribes and administrative specialists, valued for their literacy and organizational skills, found employment throughout the Assyrian Empire, where their expertise proved essential for managing the complex bureaucratic requirements of imperial governance. These officials carried with them not only practical administrative knowledge, but also cultural traditions that influenced local practices in their new locations. Cuneiform tablets from Assyrian administrative centres as far south as Babylon preserve examples of Hurrian legal formulations and bureaucratic procedures that were gradually incorporated into standard imperial administrative practice. The influence of Hurrian religious specialists extended beyond the boundaries of former Mitanni territory, as deportees established communities throughout the Assyrian Empire that maintained traditional worship practices while adapting to local conditions. Temple archives from various Assyrian cities contain references to Hurrian priests, who served in official capacities while secretly maintaining traditional religious observances within their expatriate communities. These religious practitioners developed sophisticated methods for preserving theological knowledge through oral traditions that could be transmitted without written records that might attract unwanted official attention. Archaeological discoveries in Anatolia reveal the profound impact of Hurrian cultural traditions on Hittite religious and artistic development during the period following Mitanni's political collapse. Excavations at Hittite religious centres have uncovered extensive archives of ritual texts written in Hurrian language that were used in major state ceremonies, indicating the high regard in which Hittite authorities held Hurrian theological expertise. These documents preserve complex mythological narratives featuring Hurrian deities, whose adventures and relationships provided theological frameworks that influence Hittite understanding of divine authority and cosmic order. The famous Kumabi cycle, preserved in Hittite archives but composed in Hurrian language, demonstrates the sophisticated literary achievements of Hurrian culture and their lasting influence on ancient Near Eastern religious thought. This epic narrative, describing the succession of divine generations culminating in the storm god's assumption of cosmic authority, provided theological concepts that influenced religious development throughout the region. The story's themes of generational conflict and divine succession found echoes in later Greek mythological traditions, suggesting cultural transmission chains that extended across vast geographical and chronological distances. Hurrian musical traditions preserved within Hittite court culture reveal another dimension of cultural survival that transcended political boundaries. Archaeological discoveries of musical instruments from Hittite palace contexts show clear derivation from Hurrian prototypes, while cuneiform tablets preserve musical notation systems that appear to have originated in Hurrian religious ceremonies. These musical traditions incorporated complex rhythmic patterns and melodic structures that influenced ceremonial practices throughout Anatolia and northern Syria, creating lasting cultural legacies that persisted long after the political circumstances of their creation had disappeared. The transmission of Hurrian architectural techniques to various regions of the ancient Near East occurred through the activities of deported craftsmen who brought specialized knowledge of construction methods developed in the challenging environmental conditions of northern Mesopotamia. Archaeological analysis of building techniques employed in Assyrian construction projects reveals the adoption of Hurrian innovations in foundation design, water management, and structural reinforcement that proved particularly valuable for construction in regions with similar geographical challenges. These technical transfers enhanced imperial construction capabilities while preserving traditional Hurrian engineering knowledge. Settlement patterns throughout former Mitanni territory demonstrate remarkable continuity, despite the political transformations that had eliminated indigenous governmental structures. Archaeological surveys reveal that many communities maintained traditional village layouts and agricultural practices that had characterized Hurrian settlement for centuries, adapting to imperial administrative requirements while preserving essential elements of community organization. These settlements typically featured central areas reserved for traditional community gatherings, alongside new facilities required for imperial tax collection and administrative oversight. The persistence of traditional agricultural techniques in former Mitanni territories reflects the practical value of indigenous knowledge systems that had been developed through generations of experience with local environmental conditions. Irrigation networks constructed during the Mitanni period continued to function under Assyrian administration, with maintenance procedures that preserve traditional engineering approaches while incorporating improvements suggested by imperial technical specialists. Archaeological investigation of these irrigation systems reveals evidence of continuous use and gradual modification that maintained essential functions while adapting to changing administrative requirements. Pottery production in former Mitanni territories provides particularly clear evidence of cultural continuity within changing political circumstances. Archaeological analysis of ceramic assemblages from the 12th through 10th centuries BC reveals the persistence of traditional Hurrian vessel forms and decorative techniques alongside the gradual adoption of Assyrian stylistic elements. This ceramic evidence indicates that local communities maintained traditional domestic practices while adapting to imperial commercial requirements that favoured standardised production methods. The survival of Hurrian personal names in administrative documents throughout the Neo-Assyrian period demonstrates the persistence of indigenous identity markers despite official pressure for cultural assimilation. Legal texts and administrative records preserve thousands of personal names that maintain traditional Hurrian linguistic elements, often combined with Assyrian or Akkadian components that reflect the hybrid cultural environment created by imperial conquest. These naming patterns indicate that families maintained connections to ancestral traditions while adapting to the practical requirements of life under imperial rule. Commercial networks that had developed during the Mitanni period continued to function under Assyrian administration, though with modifications that reflected changing political circumstances and imperial economic priorities. Archaeological evidence from trading centres throughout northern Mesopotamia reveals the persistence of traditional commercial relationships, alongside new trading patterns that connected former Mitanni territories to distant regions of the Assyrian Empire. These commercial continuities provided mechanisms for cultural transmission that preserved Hurrian influences in regions far from their original homeland. The influence of Hurrian legal traditions on subsequent Mesopotamian jurisprudence appears in various legal texts that preserve distinctive Hurrian approaches to property rights, family law, and commercial regulation. These legal concepts, transmitted through the activities of Hurrian legal specialists who found employment in imperial administrative systems, contributed to the development of standardized legal procedures that incorporated elements from various regional traditions. Archaeological discoveries of legal archives from the Neo-Assyrian period reveal the gradual synthesis of different legal traditions into comprehensive imperial legal systems. Textile production techniques developed in Mitanni workshops continued to influence manufacturing practices throughout the ancient Near East as deported craftsmen established production centres in their new locations. Archaeological analysis of textile remains from various sites reveals the persistence of distinctive Hurrian weaving techniques and decorative patterns that maintained traditional artistic elements while adapting to local material availability and market preferences. These textile traditions contributed to the development of luxury goods production that enhanced imperial economic capabilities while preserving traditional Hurrian artistic knowledge. The transformation of Hurrian cultural traditions through interaction with other regional cultures created syncretic forms that preserved essential elements while adapting to new environmental and social conditions. Archaeological evidence from Syrian sites reveals the development of hybrid cultural forms that combined Hurrian religious practices with local traditions, creating distinctive regional variations that maintained connections to ancestral homeland while establishing new cultural identities adapted to local circumstances. The gradual integration of Hurrian cultural elements into broader ancient Near Eastern civilization occurred through complex processes of cultural exchange that operated alongside political and economic transformations. These cultural transmission mechanisms ensured that significant aspects of Hurrian civilization survived the political destruction of the Mitanni kingdom, contributing to the rich cultural heritage that characterized the ancient Near East during the first millennium BC. Archaeological evidence continues to reveal new dimensions of this cultural survival, demonstrating the resilience of human cultural traditions in the face of political upheaval and systematic efforts at cultural suppression. The systematic excavation of ancient Near Eastern archaeological sites, beginning in the mid-19th century, gradually unveiled the forgotten civilization of the Mitanni Empire, whose very existence had been largely erased from historical memory by the thoroughness of Assyrian conquest and subsequent cultural suppression. French archaeologist Ernest de Sarzec's pioneering work at Tello in the 1870s first brought attention to cuneiform tablets mentioning Hurrian personal names and geographical references that suggested a previously unknown political entity in northern Mesopotamia. These initial discoveries prompted more systematic investigations at sites such as Tel Brak, where Max Malouin's excavations in the 1930s uncovered substantial architectural remains and administrative archives that provided the first concrete evidence of Mitanni urban planning and governmental organisation. The excavations at Tel Brak revealed a complex urban centre featuring massive defensive walls constructed from fired brick, administrative buildings equipped with sophisticated record-keeping facilities, and residential quarters that demonstrated careful urban planning adapted to the challenging environmental conditions of northern Mesopotamia. The site's stratigraphy showed clear evidence of multiple construction phases corresponding to different periods of Mitanni political development, with the most impressive architectural remains dating to the 15th and 14th centuries BC, when the kingdom reached its greatest territorial extent and cultural sophistication. Archaeological investigation of the palace quarter uncovered throne rooms decorated with elaborate wall paintings, featuring traditional Hurrian religious motifs, alongside Indo-Aryan ceremonial elements, providing tangible evidence of the cultural synthesis that characterized Mitanni civilization. The discovery of cuneiform archives at Tel Brak and related sites provided crucial documentation of Mitanni administrative procedures, legal systems, and diplomatic relationships that had been preserved despite the systematic destruction that accompanied Assyrian conquest. These tablets, numbering in the thousands, revealed sophisticated bureaucratic structures that managed complex territorial holdings, tribute collection systems, and military organizations across vast geographical distances. The administrative records demonstrated the kingdom's remarkable capacity for coordinating activities between the central government at Washukani and provincial centres throughout Syria and northern Mesopotamia, utilising communication networks and standardised procedures that facilitated effective imperial governance. Parallel excavations at Tel Lelan under Harvey Weiss's direction, beginning in the 1970s, uncovered additional evidence of Mitanni urban development and agricultural management that complemented discoveries from other major sites. The excavations revealed extensive irrigation systems, grain storage facilities, and craft production workshops that demonstrated the economic foundations supporting Mitanni political and military achievements. Archaeological analysis of agricultural installations showed sophisticated water management techniques that maximize crop productivity while preventing soil degradation, indicating advanced understanding of environmental engineering that enabled sustained agricultural surpluses essential for supporting large urban populations and military forces. The systematic investigation of Nutsi by American archaeologists in the 1920s and 1930s produced one of the most comprehensive archives of cuneiform documents from any ancient Near Eastern site, providing unprecedented insights into Mitanni's social organisation, legal procedures, and daily life during the kingdom's mature period. These tablets, numbering over 5,000 documents, preserve detailed records of property transactions, family relationships, commercial agreements, and legal disputes that reveal the sophisticated jurisprudence systems that governed Mitanni society. The Nutsi archives demonstrated the complex interactions between Hurrian indigenous traditions and Indo-Aryan legal concepts that created hybrid legal systems adapted to the multi-ethnic character of Mitanni civilization. The linguistic analysis of Hurrian cuneiform texts represented one of the most challenging aspects of Mitanni historical reconstruction, as the Hurrian language belonged to an isolated linguistic family, with no known relatives that could provide comparative frameworks for translation efforts. Early attempts at decipherment by scholars such as Johannes Friedrich and Ephraim Speiser in the 1930s and 1940s established basic grammatical structures and vocabulary elements. But comprehensive understanding of Hurrian linguistic systems required decades of painstaking philological work by successive generations of specialists. The breakthrough came through comparative analysis of bilingual texts that preserved Hurrian passages alongside Akkadian translations, enabling scholars to establish correspondences between linguistic elements and gradually reconstruct Hurrian grammatical systems. The decipherment process revealed Hurrian as an agglutinative language, featuring complex verbal morphology and sophisticated case systems that reflected the intellectual sophistication of its speakers. Hurrian literary texts preserved in cuneiform archives demonstrated advanced poetic traditions, complex mythological narratives, and sophisticated theological concepts that influenced religious development throughout the ancient Near East. The famous Kumabi cycle, composed in Hurrian but preserved in Hittite archives, revealed epic literature of exceptional quality that provided insights into Hurrian cosmological beliefs and divine hierarchies, while demonstrating the cultural influence that Mitanni civilization exerted on neighbouring societies. The discovery and analysis of the Amarna letters, beginning with their initial excavation by local villagers in 1887, revolutionized scholarly understanding of ancient Near Eastern international relations and revealed the central role that Mitanni diplomacy played in maintaining regional stability during the Late Bronze Age. These cuneiform tablets, numbering over 350 documents, preserved actual diplomatic correspondence between royal courts that demonstrated sophisticated protocols governing international relationships, commercial agreements, and military cooperation arrangements. The letters revealed the complex personal relationships that developed between rulers of different kingdoms, with Mitanni kings such as Tushratta maintaining intimate friendships with Egyptian pharaohs that transcended purely political considerations. The Amarna correspondence demonstrated the sophisticated diplomatic culture that flourished during Mitanni's golden age, with elaborate gift exchange systems, carefully negotiated marriage alliances, and complex treaty arrangements that created stable frameworks for international cooperation. Tushratta's letters to Amenhotep III reveal the detailed protocols governing diplomatic relationships, including proper forms of address, ceremonial procedures, and gift-giving customs that maintained royal dignity while facilitating practical cooperation between sovereign powers. These documents provided unprecedented insights into the personal dimensions of ancient diplomacy, showing how individual relationships between rulers influenced broader patterns of international politics. The analysis of diplomatic gift exchanges documented in the Amarna letters reveal the economic dimensions of international relationships that extended far beyond symbolic gestures to encompass substantial commercial transactions. Mitanni presents to foreign courts included elaborate golden jewellery, precious stones, fine horses, and luxury textiles that represented significant economic value while demonstrating the kingdom's wealth and technological capabilities. The careful documentation of gift specifications and values created legal precedents that could be referenced in future negotiations, while establishing frameworks for commercial relationships that operated alongside formal diplomatic arrangements. Contemporary scholarly reassessment of Mitanni's role in ancient Near Eastern politics has emphasized the kingdom's crucial function in maintaining the balance of power system that characterized international relations during the Late Bronze Age. The Mitanni alliance with Egypt created a stable framework that prevented either Hittite or Assyrian expansion from achieving regional dominance, while Mitanni control over northern Syrian territories provided buffer zones that protected smaller kingdoms from absorption by larger imperial powers. This diplomatic architecture enabled the flourishing of urban civilizations throughout Syria and Palestine that might otherwise have been destroyed by continuous warfare between competing empires. The recognition of Mitanni's diplomatic innovations has led to increased scholarly appreciation of the kingdom's contributions to the development of international law and diplomatic protocol in the ancient world. Mitanni treaty arrangements established precedents for territorial agreements, commercial regulations, and dispute resolution mechanisms that influenced subsequent diplomatic practices throughout the region. The kingdom's successful integration of diverse ethnic populations through flexible administrative arrangements provided models for imperial governance that were adopted by later empires seeking to manage multi-ethnic territories without triggering widespread rebellions. Recent archaeological investigations utilizing advanced scientific techniques have revealed new dimensions of Mitanni technological achievements that were previously unrecognized or underappreciated. Metallurgical analysis of bronze artifacts from Mitanni sites has demonstrated sophisticated alloying techniques that produced materials with enhanced properties compared to contemporary products from other regions. These technological innovations contributed to Mitanni military superiority, while establishing the kingdom as a major centre for luxury goods production that supplied markets throughout the ancient Near East. The application of satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar to archaeological investigation of former Mitanni territories has revealed the extensive scale of urban planning and agricultural development that supported the kingdom's political and military achievements. Remote sensing techniques have identified irrigation networks extending over hundreds of square kilometres, urban centres with carefully planned layouts, and road systems that connected different parts of the kingdom through efficient transportation networks. These discoveries have demonstrated the sophisticated infrastructure development that enabled Mitanni civilization to flourish in the challenging environmental conditions of northern Mesopotamia. Contemporary scholarly debates regarding the nature and extent of Indo-Aryan influence within Mitanni civilization continue to generate significant academic discussion as new archaeological evidence provides additional data for analysis. Some scholars emphasize the limited numerical presence of Indo-Aryan populations within the broader Hurrian demographic majority, arguing that Indo-Aryan cultural elements represented elite adoption of prestigious foreign traditions rather than fundamental transformation of indigenous society. Alternative interpretations stress the disproportionate political and military influence exercised by Indo-Aryan elites whose specialized knowledge of horse training and chariot warfare provided crucial advantages that enabled their integration into dominant positions within Hurrian political structures. The question of Hurrian Indo-Aryan cultural synthesis has become increasingly complex as archaeological evidence reveals varying patterns of cultural interaction in different regions and time periods throughout Mitanni history. Urban centres such as Washukani show extensive evidence of cultural blending that created hybrid artistic traditions, architectural styles, and religious practices combining elements from both cultural backgrounds. Rural areas, by contrast, often maintained more traditional Hurrian cultural patterns with limited Indo-Aryan influence, suggesting that cultural synthesis occurred primarily among elite populations rather than affecting broader social groups uniformly throughout the kingdom. Linguistic evidence from Mitanni cuneiform archives provides crucial data for understanding the mechanisms of cultural interaction between Hurrian and Indo-Aryan populations. The preservation of Sanskrit-derived terminology for horse training, chariot construction, and military organization indicates specialized knowledge transmission that occurred through direct contact between Indo-Aryan specialists and Hurrian administrative systems. However, the limited extent of Indo-Aryan linguistic influence on general Hurrian vocabulary suggests that cultural interaction remained concentrated in specific technical domains rather than producing comprehensive linguistic transformation. The broader context of Late Bronze Age international relations has received increased scholarly attention as researchers recognize the interconnected nature of political developments throughout the ancient Near East during Mitanni's period of greatest influence. The kingdom's diplomatic relationships with Egypt, Hittite Anatolia, and Assyrian Mesopotamia created networks of alliance and opposition that influenced political stability across vast geographical regions. Mitanni's role as a crucial intermediary between these major powers enabled the maintenance of competitive balance that prevented any single empire from achieving regional hegemony during the 15th and 14th centuries BC. The collapse of this diplomatic balance following Mitanni's internal succession crisis and subsequent Hittite intervention had cascading effects throughout the region that contributed to the broader political instability characterizing the Late Bronze Age collapse. The elimination of Mitanni as an independent political force removed a crucial stabilizing element from the international system, enabling more aggressive expansion policies by surviving powers while eliminating diplomatic frameworks that had previously facilitated peaceful conflict resolution. These developments contributed to the pattern of increasing warfare and political fragmentation that marked the transition from the Late Bronze Age to the Early Iron Age throughout the ancient Near East. Modern understanding of Mitanni civilization continues to evolve as ongoing archaeological investigations and scholarly analysis reveal new dimensions of the kingdom's achievements and influence. The recognition of Mitanni's crucial role in ancient Near Eastern political development has elevated the kingdom from historical obscurity to acknowledgement as one of the major powers that shaped regional civilization during the second millennium BC. This scholarly reassessment reflects broader changes in archaeological methodology and historical interpretation that emphasize the importance of previously marginalized societies in understanding the complex processes of cultural development and political change in the ancient world. The legacy of Mitanni civilization extends far beyond its immediate chronological and geographical boundaries through the cultural influences that persisted long after the kingdom's political destruction. Hurrian religious traditions, artistic techniques, and technological innovations continue to influence developments throughout the ancient Near East for centuries following the Assyrian conquest, demonstrating the enduring impact of cultural achievements that transcended political circumstances. The preservation of Hurrian cultural elements within later civilizations provides testimony to the sophisticated nature of Mitanni society and its lasting contributions to the rich cultural heritage of ancient Near Eastern civilization. The study of Mitanni history is thus transformed from an obscure academic specialization to a crucial component of ancient Near Eastern historical understanding, revealing the complex interactions between political power, cultural development, and international relations that characterized one of history's most dynamic periods. The kingdom's rise from regional fragmentation to imperial dominance, followed by internal crisis and ultimate destruction, provides valuable insights into the factors that enable political success and the vulnerabilities that can lead to rapid collapse even among seemingly powerful civilizations. These historical lessons continue to resonate with contemporary scholars seeking to understand the complex dynamics of political development and cultural change in human societies across different historical periods and geographical contexts.